Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please give us a few minutes as the participants are still coming in. Thank you. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to our second theme for the JUST series on implementation and application of CCPT. Just a couple of announcements before we start. Please be informed that for those who have registered for the webinar session at 2 p.m., specifically on insurance and takaful operators, kindly use the link shared in the chat box as this differs from the session in the morning. As this is a webinar style event, kindly use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for questions you may have. Please note that the Q&A will be addressed at the end of the session. This session will be recorded and the recordings will be made available after the end of the session, including the slides. At the end of the session, there will be a short survey. Appreciate if you could take the time to answer these questions to facilitate future learning initiatives. With that, I pass this session to Encik Sharil Azwar Jimin, Chief Sustainability Officer of Maybank and Deputy Chair of JC3SC4 for his opening remarks and introduction to our first speaker. Thank you.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope it is not too late to wish all of you a very happy new year. Welcome to today's JUST series, incorporating ESG into risk management, and more specifically in relation to Theme 2 on the implementation and application of CCPT. For those who attended a session last week on measuring portfolio alignment to climate scenarios and climate transition stress testing, I do hope that it was an insightful session for you, as it was for me. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for taking the time to attend to this session, and a special thanks to the team behind the scenes who have been working tirelessly to ensure that this event is a successful one. The Joint Committee on Climate Change of JC3, led by Bank Negara Malaysia and the Securities Commission of Malaysia, is actively focusing on transitioning the Malaysian financial sector towards a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. One of the subcommittees under JC3, which is the SC4, chaired by Raja Amir Shah, the CEO of HSBC Amanah, and myself as the Deputy Chair, is mandated to build and strengthen the awareness of climate change through engagement and capacity development initiatives. This year, the subcommittee has curated a holistic series themed the JUST series, centered around issues pertinent to financial institutions and the broader industry. The training calendar is structured by quarters and is designed with a view towards practical implementation of ESG. The theme for this year is especially timely as the region begins to recover from the pandemic, with questions surrounding how we do our part in keeping businesses afloat and ensuring just transition. This rings true to us especially at Maybank, as sustainability is not just about our clients and communities. Today's session does not come at a more opportune time, considering the issuance of the Climate Change and Principle-Based Taxonomy (CCPT) by Bank Negara Malaysia in April 2021 for reporting this year. As part of JC3 SC1, the CCPT Implementation Group, which is co-led by Maybank and AIA, has been tasked to spearhead the operationalization of the CCPT for the industry. And through this session, we hope that participants will be able to gain a deeper understanding of the CCPT requirements, enable greater clarity on classifying economic activities contributing to climate change objectives, and the ability to operationalize these requirements. Before I hand the session to our first speaker, Encik Ramzi Sharif, I would like to thank the team once again for your great efforts in delivering our first series. And thank you to all our speakers who have graciously provided their support. Thank you again for your participation, and I hope that you have a fruitful session ahead.
Yep, thank you, Sharil. Meanwhile, you can always post any questions or requests to your chat room. I think, Sharil, you need to click to everyone if you want to respond to everyone. But let's begin then. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning to you. First and foremost, let me thank all of you here today for spending your precious time in getting to know more about Bank Negara Malaysia's climate change and principle-based taxonomy, or in short, CCPT. I would also like to congratulate JC3 SC4 for the JC3 Upskilling Sustainability Training Program, which in my opinion is very important to ensure all players in this industry are well equipped with knowledge and skill sets required to address the hottest topic next to COVID, the ESG risk in general and climate risk specifically. As you all are aware, this training is divided into 3 sessions. Just to make sure everyone is in the right session, this is session 1, where we will cover the implementation of CCPT and financial assets classification that applies to all financial institutions. This session will last within 1.5 hours and will continue to session 2 at 10:30 a.m. This session will cover the application of CCPT for banks. Last but not least, session 3 will begin at 2 p.m. to cover the application of CCPT for insurance and takaful operators. Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, let me introduce myself. My name is Ramzi, and I am heading the Group CRO office in Maybank. I am one of the members in JC3 SC1 that looks at risk management and representing Maybank as a co-lead for the CCPT implementation group together with AIA and CIMB as the secretariat. With me today is a representative from co-lead, Mr. Junaid Iqbal from AIA. Junaid, want to say hi?
Hi, hello everyone.
Yep. He will be the main presenter in session 3, scheduled later in the afternoon. You would have also noticed that the KPMG logo appears on the slide too. As this session is meant to enhance CCPT understanding among the players in the industry, the CCPT IG has decided to bring in Madam Pang Oi Cheng, or more commonly known as Oi, from KPMG. Say hi, Oi.
Oh, sorry. Hello, good morning.
Hey. Okay, to give her insights on CCPT, which would benefit all of us in the industry, and in addition to our experience in implementing CCPT in Maybank and AIA. I sincerely thank Oi and her team for the consolidation of the deck. Without further ado, let us go through the agenda for session 1. We will look at CCPT, covering all the 5 general principles and its classification, with some case studies and economic activities assessment guide. More case studies and specific instruments will be covered in session 2 and 3 later on. Let us go through CCPT documents itself. The draft. Let's go through the next slide. Okay, the draft for CCPT was issued earlier at the end of 2020 as a collective guideline led by Bank Negara and few other FIs in JC3 SC1. The final version was released on 30th April 2021 and revised reporting template was issued on 30 September 2021. With increasing concerns on climate change risks and its impact to the financial systems, FIs are required to embed climate change risks in risk management, business operations, and decision making. Most importantly, FIs should be promoting financial flows to activities that will support the transition to low carbon and climate resilient economy. Therefore, this CCPT will facilitate FIs in identifying and classifying economic activities that could contribute to climate change objectives. It also aims to provide an overview of climate change risks and its impact to the financial system. This CCPT is applicable to all FIs under the purview of Bank Negara Malaysia. Starting from this month of January 2022, all FIs are required to start classifying three main assets according to CCPT. These are loans or financing, financial investment assets, as well as insurance and takaful cover. As the CCPT document was released, a number of FIs were chosen to do pilot run. These FIs, who are also happen to be in JC3, SC1, are required to submit fourth quarter 2021 CCPT data by end of this month. As the co-lead of the CCPT IG, I am pleased to announce that all FIs who are doing pilot run are ready to submit their first CCPT report within the stipulated deadline. Let me get Oi to get her view on CCPT as one of the pieces in Malaysian sustainability regulatory jigsaw.
Thank you, Ramsey. Just to run you through, as you know, in Malaysia, we have got a lot of regulatory reporting requirements, particularly if you talk about listing requirements, and this relates to Bursa sustainability disclosure requirements. We've got the Bank Negara BBI value-based intermediation and BBIT for Takaful now, as well as reporting requirements for climate risk management policies, which was has been encouraged by Bursa Malaysia. At the same time, we've also got disclosures to market relating to sustainable and responsible investment Sukuk framework as well. And we've got SRI funds, we've got Sukuk frameworks, and we've got the ASEAN Green and Social Sustainable Bond Standards. So all of this add up together to make it I wouldn't say a competing framework, because they all complement each other. They make it a comprehensive framework in which financial institutions are then able to report with regards to the ESG risk. And in this case, we are not looking just at climate change risk, which the CCPT is focused on, but also on the ESG framework as well. So the CCPT plays a very crucial part in the risk assessment process, because as you can see globally, and also last month we saw it ourselves, the impact of climate change has significant financial and reputational and brand and risk exposures to any company, as well as having significant risk to the local community. So these are things that companies need to make sure that they are able to identify climate change risk, as well as the broader ESG risk, and integrate it into their risk management framework to form a holistic manner of which they are able to prioritize and identify non-financial risk or ESG risk in this case. Back to you, Ramsey.
Thanks, Oi. Very insightful indeed. The CCPT would definitely bring more benefit to the industry. First and foremost, it will level the playing field in the financial industry, reducing greenwashing and enhance transparency. When we started this journey, some of the FIs have expressed their concerns on whether they are on the right path in addressing climate risk. CCPT gives FIs the guidelines on what can be considered as supporting, transitioning, and what should be in the watch list. Since CCPT is a taxonomy, it provides a homogeneous and rigorous evaluation of clients' environmental performance. Clients can no longer move from one FI to another in order to avoid being asked about their transition plan in addressing climate change. FIs can now ask our clients comfortably knowing that the same evaluation will be done by other FIs too. By classifying financial assets and insurance and takaful cover in accordance with CCPT, one can assess FI's resilience of its strategy and risk management, taking into consideration different climate change exposures from its economic activities. Furthermore, the FI resilience can be tested using scenario analysis based on climate scenarios such as 2 degrees or applying hazards like flood. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure by now you would have heard many versions of climate risk taxonomy. While EU and MAS have introduced their own taxonomy, we are now hearing about ASEAN taxonomy and the possibility of OJK to issue green financing taxonomy. Notwithstanding that, in Malaysia, Securities Commission has invited public feedback on SC's sustainable and responsible investment taxonomy. Perhaps Oi can help to give some insights on these taxonomies.
Thanks, Ramsey. The thing is, with regards to taxonomy, it's just a way for regulators to assess how each financial institution or primarily financial institutions are able to classify their risk in accordance to the various objectives the taxonomy has been set out on. So if you look at the EU taxonomy, you see that it's very much focused on climate change, obviously, but it also focuses on environmental objectives as well, relating to marine and water and transition to circular economy. So as you see climate change and how it's being managed, so things like pollution control and prevention control, which is at the beginning, comes into fore, and it mainly lies in the form of regulations for us here in Malaysia. Then it moves on to technology and adaptation, and then it moves on to new aspects such as the circular economy. So if we were to look at it evolving in Malaysia, the same language and the same process is also happening. So we've got health and safety, environmental legislation in Malaysia. Our government has already stated that they are going to come out with climate change regulation. And the 12 Malaysian plan has also stated that it is going to move into the circular economy. So to implement this, you need to have what we call essential criteria to screen, so that you are able to identify which of your target clients or your clients that in your existing clients fall into which category as per the CCPT requirement. For us in Malaysia, it's simpler in the sense that it's not as complicated as the EU taxonomy, but there are still requirements, which is to identify which of your economic sector that you're dealing with falls into which sector of climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and also transitioning towards a low carbon economy, or which of your sectors under GP5, Guiding Principle 5, is going to be a no-go. So the main criteria which Bank Negara has actually set up is first to do no significant harm. And secondly, to ensure that there are remediation measures that have been put in place to transition. So basically, companies will have to assess, where they are themselves before they report to you, or when you as a financial institution inquire where they are with regards to their climate management journey. So in essence, we've tried to make it as simple as possible. If you compare it to the ASEAN taxonomy, it's more complicated in the sense that there are more criteria, there are more objectives set on, although their criteria is simpler in that sense. So it's a journey, and we are evolving, and I'm sure Ramsey will be able to let you know more with regards to where Bank Negara is intending to go and all. Back to you, Ramsey.
Hey, thanks for the insight, sorry. Here comes the challenges. Now, let us go through some challenges and the proposed solutions in implementing CCPT. And these are the challenges faced not just by Maybank, but other pilot FIs have voiced out the same. For those who are about to implement CCPT, I would really urge you to join the CCPT IG immediately by emailing to ccptig@bnm.gov.my. I shall include the email address at the end of the slides, as well as for your reference. By becoming a member, You would have access to the FAQs posted by other FIs and its response from Bank Negara and CCPT IG. At the same time, you can raise any issues pertaining to CCPT implementation. There is a high chance that other members will face the same difficulties and manage to resolve it. At the same time, the members of the CCPT IG are working together on harmonizing standards among the FIs. Now, one of the challenges, and I think the most common ones, is the challenges to obtain accurate data and information from our clients. While most clients are aware of climate risk, a lot of them have not done much to really look at how climate change will impact their business. As a result, most information collected are qualitative in nature rather than quantitative. It is important to start identifying reliable internal and external data sources to accurately reflect the exposure of climate risk. I would urge every FI to start calculating CO2 emission equivalent under Scope 1 and 2 and gradually move to calculate Scope 3. At the same time, you may want to use data service providers out there to help you in getting the right data for your evaluation. Another common issue is the lack of expertise in ESG area. Suddenly, the demand for this area has surged, and you will realize that if you do not act on this quickly, your FI will be left behind. It would be best for now to establish a dedicated sustainability department to manage and oversee sustainability matters. This sustainability office can help to upskill your staff and organize awareness workshops. Do invest in these programs, which can help to align your vision and culture to sustainability journey. While the GPs in CPT are quite descriptive, implementing these GPs into practice are quite challenging. We will see more of this later when we talk about the GPs. Oi, what would be the indirect impact of climate change and how difficult it is to assess this impact?
Well, the impact of climate change occurs in two ways. For an organization, the impact to your cash flows, to your capital allocations, and to your future plans is something that most companies haven't actually started evaluating because all these years we are not geared towards thinking about the impact of climate change on our books. So one of the key things that the CCPT, as you can see already, is going to drive towards is to start companies or financial institutions initially to evaluate their financial exposures. And indirect impact then comes in from the fact that the clients and the customers KPMG is also part of financial services and all. And we find that there is a lot of lack of awareness, lack of understanding as to why this needs to happen, and lack of capacity especially within the SME sectors. Although there are some bigger companies with the lower caps public listed companies which also face these same challenges. So indirectly, it's difficult to measure the impact of indirect impacts of climate change. And so to be able to define the financial quantity in which your institution may or may not be exposed to, therein lies the difficulty. As you said, having data is very important in that sense as well. Back to you, Ramzi.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of risk, the ESG risk experts, to be honest, I'm not an expert in any of ESG risk. So happen that I'm involved in a lot of ESG work, and I think that's how I develop myself as to upskill myself in ESG elements. But from your point of view, Oi, if any FI is looking out there in terms of trying to get help for their banks or FIs to really pursue the ESG journey, what would be the source? Of course, besides KPMG, I'm sure that you one of them. What would be the reference point on what to look out for?
I think the first difficulty, climate change, as members, participants here, I presume would have attended a lot of the training that has been held by the JC3 in its various forms and previously as well with Bank Negara. You will understand that climate change risk actually comes into two parts. It's the physical risk that you have to assess, which is the easy part because that's what we can see. We can see the flood, we can feel high temperature, and we can feel there is no water, right? That's the physical risk. And then we've got the transitional risk. And that's the difficult part because it is looking into the future and trying to figure, okay, when is the Malaysian government going to come out with our climate change legislation? Okay, what form will it take? Okay, don't know anything yet at the present moment. What is the cost of carbon that is going to come out? So when you look at transitioning and when you look at trying to quantify and identify your exposures for financial institutions, all of this will come in because your clients will be coming to tell you, your customers will be coming in to tell you, I've got a plan, I'm going to transition. So then you have to figure out what sort of plan it is and how far working that plan it is, right? So let's say, for example, they're saying they're going to go for energy efficiency. So then how long will that energy efficiency plan take them? How far will it go? And will they actually achieve their stated goal if they stated to go net zero? And is that really achievable? Number one, how does that affect the books in terms of return of investment, in terms of cash flow, and in terms of ability to access capital? So all of these are important. And so when as banks, and if you talk about loan sector, and this is in this case, Ramsey, correct me if I'm wrong, is very much a retail loan, right? If you're looking at that, then all of these factors come in. So the question then is for banks, how do you ensure that your credit risk assessment people are able to understand what they're doing? So there has to be a methodology and there has to be a system put in place so that you are able, as a financial institution, you are able to evaluate this type of risk. And so the same process also applies for investment risk as well. Investment, the types of investment that you have to do, because for financial institutions, right, if you talk about banks and insurance is investing, it is loans, and to simplify the matter, Ramsey, I'm sure it's more complicated than that. So it's investment, it is loans, and it's also the type of insurance product that you have. So this comes into play. So the best thing is, if you're not sure, to refer to the IG, to the JC3 and the sessions that we have today, because it's a collective of industry players already, which has been grappling with the problem, like the pilot players that they are. And as Ramsey says, Maybank is sort of like ready to report the ready gun. So with that, there's a lot of learning that can be done before you refer to a consultant, or if you already gone down the consultant route, then make sure that your consultant keeps in touch with the JC3 so that they understand where the direction and what the sector is actually looking at. Back to you, Ramsey.
Yep. Thank you. So in CCPT IG, most of the work that we are doing is to standardize some of the CCPT requirements and recommend it for the industry to adopt. As an example, we are working with RAM, rating agency in Malaysia, to help us to classify bonds in accordance to CCPT classifications, and also to engage Bursa to do the same for equities. At the same time, we are proposing what can be considered as green under auto vehicle, as we foresee the definitions can vary from one FI to another. These are some of the standards that we are currently developing and will be shared to all FIs as and when it is approved by Bank Negara. So please get your voices to be heard by joining the CCPT IG. Now, let me move to the second part of session 1, which is the Economic Activities Assessment Guide, and discuss the 5 guiding principles of CCPT, or in short, the GPs. There's a question here on climate change intention. Do climate change actions and targets only involve the environment? Are there any social related issues that need to be considered in the context of climate change impact and the taxonomy. My personal opinion is that having a narrow environmental focus does not achieve the spirit of sustainability. Other taxonomies have components related to social. All right. So let me go through some of this climate change, and I'll go through the debate that we went through in the JC3 SC1 as well. There were a lot of talk at the time during the design of the CCPT itself, when we try to incorporate some social elements in there. Of course, ultimately at the end of the day, JC3 still look at the climate change. Um, but to give a proper guidance on what really climate change is, really not just on environment. Now, based on United Nations reports, it is expected that the temperature of this planet will keep rising, right, due to human activities. If we don't act now, it is expected that such climate change will bring significant physical risk impact to humanity, rising from an increase in sea level, change in heat wave, more frequent natural disasters, change in landscape and crop yield, and all kind of other possible impact. Now, it is very important to understand that climate change is not just about environmental issues, but most importantly and largely, it is also a social issue. People may lose home and food or become jobless as industry is transitioning towards net zero carbon equivalent in the future, either by voluntarily or pressures from authority. Now, imagine if you are fishing in a boat and I'm an angler, and suddenly a small hole appears on the floor, allowing water to enter the boat slowly. If you decide to cover the hole and stop the water from entering the boat, this is what we call as mitigation. If you decide instead to let the water in, and once in a while you will scoop out the water with a pail, this is what we call adaptation. Under CCPT, GP1 captures all activities under climate change mitigation, which meant either to reduce or avoid GHG emissions, okay, or to enable others to do the same. GP2 captures all activities under climate change adaptation, which meant to implement measures to increase own resilience to climate change or enable others to do so. As a matter of rule of thumb, it captures anything you do to reduce physical risk. While GP1 and GP2 are meant for climate change, GP3 is added to capture other elements of environmental risk, such as to prevent, reduce, and control pollution, protect healthy ecosystem and biodiversity, as well as efficient use of energy, water, and other natural resources. Under GP4, it captures the transition efforts via demonstration of commitment and willingness and remedial measures towards sustainable practices. These remedial measures should address the significant harm identified at either transactional level or overall business level or both. Lastly, GP5 ensures that economic and business activities are not illegal and do not contravene environmental laws, human rights, and labor laws. I'm sure that all FIs will ensure no activities will fall under this principle. Based on these principles, the financial assets are classified into supporting or C1, transitioning or C2 and C3, while C4 and C5 are classified as watch lists. So how do we assess on whether these GPs are being met or not? The assessment criteria used can be divided into four main parts of the economic activity: the purpose, the impact, the outcome, and the measurement. The activity should positively contribute to either mitigation or adaptation of climate risk. At the same time, the activity should be sustainable and does not give any negative impacts to other adaptation efforts or cause harm to the environment and community. The outcome of these economic activities should be closely defined, sustainable, and fit for purpose. Lastly, The outcome of the economic activity shall be observable, measurable, and monitored over time against a set of predetermined indicators. Now let's go deeper into GP1, climate change mitigation. Some of these examples are generation of renewable energy. However, by doing so, such activity should not cause any negative impacts towards the environment. I mean, what's the whole point of having a hydro plant energy when you cut down reserve forest, right? So these are the things that you need to balance. In terms of assessments of GP1, the criteria need to be embedded into financing or investment assessment at origination or upon facility customer review. We need to identify the type of information required to perform this assessment and the source of this data. Let me pass the floor to Oi to go through a case study and some examples of the mitigation activities under certain sectors.
Ramsey, yes, thanks a lot. We've collated some examples and we've collated some case studies to show how companies have been dealing with classification and the taxonomy climate change mitigation alignment. And in this case, we've got a case study looking at forestry, and looking at a company that is with its own forest holdings and has also got forest-based initiatives. So the EU criteria basically says existing forest management is described as a management of land that is reported as forest in accordance with sustainable forest management principles. I mean, yeah, here in Malaysia, we do have the same principles, and it's also practiced by our states that are involved in forestry, principally in Sabah and Sarawak, where there are vast tracts of sustainable forest management. So this means that the forest is used to maintain its biodiversity, productivity, as well as productivity, and has its regeneration capacity. So these are things that basically the company needs to be able to demonstrate that they have programs in place to ensure that there is renewal, regeneration, and increase in terms of biodiversity. So then what it then means is that as a financial institution, you need to be aware of the impact arising if there is arising for the maintenance of the sustainably managed forest. What sort of information that you need with regards to biodiversity? Apart from biodiversity, as Ramsey says, also the rights of the indigenous peoples here in Malaysia, if we were to take this to apply it on a local situation, and the opportunities for job creation or employment that is created. As Ramsey has also stated, climate change has got greater impact, and to assess on the narrow criteria based on environment basically sometimes doesn't quite fit with regards to the potential impacts assessment that you can have. So you can have negatives arising from environmental damages, but you can also have positives arising from socio-economic positives from jobs, from greater access to basically, when you build a logging road and all that, you create better access for the local indigenous people to go into the ground. So all of this has to be assessed. So in the SEB, in this case, what they looked at was the fact that the client that they had forest certification, and in Malaysia we do have the same forest certifications either run by MTCC or PEFC, and in this case they have then in that case fulfilled the criteria of do no harm with regards to the initiatives that they have undertaken. So in that essence, the evaluators that you have within your organization need to know, and you can basically do this through creation of checklists and all of that, need to know if you've got a forest plantation, what do you need to do and what sort of information that you need to have. Right. There is also the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible business for minimum criteria for safeguards for clients' transparent description of social process. But at the same time, you can find the information within the certification processes, as well as the World Bank IFC environmental and social impact guidelines that they have. So there's a slew of information that is available to help organizations evaluate the client's data that they're provided to see which category that they fall in. And moving forward, you will also see that, you will also see that we have, in this case, provided a list of information that you can ask for to help evaluate your customers, to see which sector or to see where they are with regards to the guiding principles, and also with the categories within the guiding principles. So in this case, we have provided for agriculture, mining, manufacturing, electricity, water supply, construction, retail for motorcycles, food, and all. It's quite extensive in this case. And I think what it needs to for participants here today is to take this and go and review and to see where it fits with regards to your client exposures in terms of the services, products and services that you have, and the investments that you're making. And this will actually form a guide in which you can determine whether your customer is in GP1, GP2, GP3, or GP4. And we've also provided examples as we move along, as Ramzi will describe with regards to GP1 and all the way up to GP4. I think GP5, it's no need with regards to description, right? Because it's very much related to compliance to the law. So these are things that you need to be aware of. So guidance has been provided as much as possible today. Back to you, Ramzi.
Hey, very useful indeed. So if you all notice, those that related to industry are normally passed to OI, and that would give more an industry perspective rather than coming just from Maybank. But I will share a bit more Maybank's experience in the second session. So stay tuned, those who are interested to join the second session. So let's go through. There are a few Q&A coming on board. Let me hold that Q&A until the end of the presentation so that I can, because some of it I may have probably addressed during the presentation itself. Okay, so let's go to the GP2 now, where GP2 climate change adaptation has the same approach on how we assess GP1. We have just experienced one of the biggest flood in Malaysia, and its impact has caused many to lose their home or damaged badly. Some of the examples under GP2 are adapting buildings with capability to cope with future climate conditions and extreme weather. Now, Oi, can you help to explain a bit further on this assessment criteria and the examples of adaptations in different sectors?
Thanks, Ramzi. The GP2 with regards to adaptation basically is after you've already assessed what sort of climate risk that you have. I mean, as I'm speaking from a company's perspective, I'm not speaking from a financial institution perspective. So I give you the perspective with regards to adaptation for a company first. This is basically sitting on the other side of the fence. So after you've assessed your climate risk and you have determined that you are at risk, number one, and your greatest risk probably will be from risk of stranded asset arising from maybe extreme flood or regular occurrence of flood, making it impossible to operate. You have to then decide how do you want to adapt. If you still want to keep on staying at your current position, you have to then decide how do you want to future-proof and make your site more resilient in this case. So this could involve things like raising the footpath, raising the walls, making the mitigation against any fuel burning equipment, let's say for example boilers and things like that, raising it above floor level, looking at, this is talking about beyond future, I mean before energy efficiency programs and all of that, is to adapt and to make sure that your buildings are and your equipment are able to function during the event of any climatic situation. We've been working with several clients who are at risk from drought. So how do you ensure that there is adequate water? What is the adaptation that you have to look at? Number one. And the second question then arises, which our clients will have to deal with is how long can this adaptation last as the drought moves on. So when we look in terms of adaptation, it's not just on a short-term basis, but on a long-term basis as to how long can you do this for, and for how much in terms of capital allocation, capital expenditures, or that you have to provide for in your books in future. So these are things that are very important. And number two is, if you have already made your building more resilient and you are able to operate, the third one that you have to think about is, many years ago, I was working with a client in Perlis, and they had a really bad flood. And in that flood for 5 days, nobody could have materials in, and nobody could send out their materials. That's number one. So then the second one was that nobody was able, their employees was not able to go home. So basically they were trapped. So there is socio-economic impact in the sense of the local community and of the employees that you have, as well as to your supply chain. So when it comes to adaptation, you need to consider not on the short-term basis, but on a long-term basis, if you still want to maintain your operations in what is essentially now has become a critical flood zone or a drought zone area. So these are things that you need to consider, and you need to then start building alternative plans to ensure that there is no disruption to your business. And all of that needs forward planning, and all of that needs careful financial management as well. And these are things that the financial institutions will be looking at when we talk about climate change adaptation. So we are not talking about short-term, 5 years sort of thing. We are talking about long-term. So you look at where the basic scenario analysis is usually done up to 2030. And if you think, 2050, and you think about it, 2050 really is not that far away, right? We are going to be achieving a 2-degree rise. And if we don't curtail our activities now, it's probably going to be faster than 2030. So these are things that we need to be aware of, and we need to start asking our customer bases, how have they adapted, and how do they plan to ensure business resilience and business continuity in this case. And for financial institutions, in essence, really that is your risk. Back to you, Ramsey.
Right. Well, I was looking at the questions, and Eric asked in terms of within the context of the SAB, who is to decide that it does not cause significant harm. So I thought it'd be timely enough to go through GP3. Admittedly, it is rather difficult to ascertain the business activity has no significant harm to the environment. Now, for example, FIs need to ensure that the clients do undertake cleaning measures immediately when there is a pollution, having proper waste management practices, prevent soil erosion and runoff into water courses, and avoid land-side use on protected natural areas. The best way to assess this GP3 is for FI to establish a clear RAC or risk acceptance criteria, ensuring that there are no significant harm to the environment. All periodic monitoring and remediation activities must use the risk-based approach to address ecosystem and biodiversity concerns, including human health risks. As part of annual due diligence assessment criteria, the progress of transitioning towards climate supporting category can be included. FIs may also consider assessment of green sustainability labeling, certifications, or assurance. In short, at the end of the day, just to respond to Eric directly, who is to decide? Really, the FI have to assess and decide on whether the client is meeting GP3 or not. And truth to be told, is very difficult to get C1 because saying no significant harm to the environment would also implies that you also have a proper mitigation and adaptation practices in that particular business. And when we look at it, I thought, Oi, do you have any comments on how do you want to assess criteria for GP3?
I think for financial institutions, sort of setting up, if for the smaller ones, for bigger ones like Maybank, you might be able to set up your own risk assessments and all. Short of going out and doing the due diligence yourselves, and for the international banks, this is something they actually do on a periodic basis as well. You can only do your best by relying on international certifications. You do have to trust in the integrity of international certifications. Certifications like ISO 14001, the maintenance of the certificate and how they have achieved, because it's based on the principles of continuous improvement. If your client is able to demonstrate that they have been able to move the boundary forward with regards to the ISO 14001 in relation to environmental matters, then it's something that it is internationally accepted. It is a certification that has been around for a long time. So things like PEFC and all of that, you can ask for additional information to see whether what sort of non-conformances that has been found by the auditors, because all of this, to maintain your certification, you do need to have regular audits. And so you can actually see, if you ask for the information, to see the progress that your clients has been making in that regard. So you can then discuss with the clients to say, you've got this issue, how are you going to overcome it? But there has to be a level of disclosure which is accepted and understood by your client base as well. And that I think is one of the things that is difficult at the present moment, because industry doesn't quite understand what financial institutions are trying to do. Now, when it comes to things like social impact assessments and all of that, you can rely on things like, if you're talking about plantations and all, RSPO has got a very strong social impact. In fact, forest certification also has very strong certification with regards to social. Where it falls out a little bit is with regards to manufacturing, and especially with established manufacturing, because the certification systems that apply are only on the OSHAs, occupational health and safety, or the environment. The practice of looking at social impact and social certifications is not quite there yet, although a lot of our companies and manufacturers in the manufacturing side do supply overseas, and so they are subjected to a lot of social impact audits. So these are things that you have to be a know, and then you have to start asking from your customer base to demonstrate what they're doing with regards to social. So there's a lot of information available actually. So it's a matter of knowing where it is and being able to find out the information so that you are able to support the fact that you have evaluated based on Guiding Principle 3 and you have data to support C1 in that regard. Back to you, Ramsey.
Okay. More questions are coming in. Let's go through with GP4 first. Then we can address back Q&A. Okay. Well, so under GP4, while the business needs to demonstrate the remedial efforts undertaken, it also includes the commitment as demonstrated by the business. Now, for me, this the unique feature of the CCPT, which is to promote transitions rather than penalizing those who have yet to implement any remedial efforts. And this is where FI can play a vital role to influence our clients to start committing on their sustainability plan. By demonstrating a meaningful effort and commitment to transform would be aligned to GP4 alone. FIs, however, still need to determine strategy to manage the portfolios, which may not be aligned to the FI's ESG framework, which may include transition and delisting plans. Okay. For GP5, FIs need to ensure that we are not facilitating any transaction or activity that may cause significant harm to the environment. This GP5 also contains some social elements such as human rights and labor laws. To the FIs that have presence in other countries, it will be a good idea to establish a list of prohibited economic activities as part of risk appetite statement. It is also best to obtain a written statement or enforce compliance clauses signed by customers either through LOU or any other form of facility agreements to to give effect to GP5. Now, under CCPT, a transaction is classified as either C1, C2, C3, C4, or C5 for each transaction. And I repeat, for each transaction, GP1 and GP2 are used for the assessment, while GP3 and GP4 are used for the overall business assessment. If the transaction meets either GP1 or GP2, while the business, say for example, has no significant harm to the environment, the transaction will be classified as climate supporting C1. While it is not easy to demonstrate a business has no significant harm to the environment, the next category of classification is C2 and C3 transitioning category, which put more emphasis on GP4 at the business level in terms of transitioning and remedial efforts, as demonstrated by the commitment and willingness of the business. Should there be no transition, no remediation efforts from the business, these transactions will be classified under C4 and C5 watch list category. Now, please take note that while you need to assess on every transactions, you only need to assess one time at the business level. That means if a company meets GP4 and has 3 transactions, these transactions can either be C2 or C3, depending on whether the transactions will meet GP1 or GP2. Now, before going through the questions, let me pass the floor to Oi to share a bit on environmental impact assessment and energy efficiency tech.
Right, we've provided some information where you can actually source for information, and this is particularly pertinent for your clients who are in the infrastructure, construction, or property development sector. And the way that EIA's environmental impact assessments are being done in Malaysia and the requirements for reporting, they are required. Let's say, for example, one of your customers is coming to you to implement. They want to build a solar panel plant, and to build a solar panel plant, they also want to build a solar panel farm, a solar farm. So in this case, the EIA will be required to assess the harm or the lack thereof to the environment and to the social and local community as well. So one of the requirements of EIAs is to ensure that the project are able to bring local community socio-economic alleviation. So these are things that are useful, and you can actually look at the report to glean information to determine whether there is enough information on mitigation, there's enough information on climate adaptation, and there's enough for you to assess whether the project does no harm to the environment. As Ramzi has said, it makes no sense to say that you're going to put in a renewable energy plant, such as solar panel farm, but at the same time, you're cutting down virgin forest, or you're cutting down any forest, even Baluka forest, because all forests has the function to act as carbon sinks. So in this case, this sort of assessments need to be done, and they generally should be reflected in the EIA report. And so when you are dealing with clients that are coming up with new assessments, new projects, and all of that, and in this case, I expect, particularly in Sabah Sarawak, the renewal discussion with regards to more dams coming up, and because it is basically a renewable energy source. So the question then is, what does the harm to the environment or potentially to local communities outweigh the benefits that you're going to get from the proposed projects? So these are weights that financial institutions, particularly for bank and even from an insurance perspective, depending on the company that you are insuring and the product that you have, whether it's a life or general insurance product, what this the evaluations that you have to make and what impact that will have onto your books and as well as your climate risk exposure. So what we're basically saying, this is a potential source of information for you guys. Right. There's also application of energy efficiency tax, and energy efficiency tax that we have that you can get from the manufacturing sector talks about energy efficiency equipment for buildings. And these are things that, particularly we're talking about small, medium enterprises or more on the medium enterprises. If they don't understand where you're coming from with regards to carbon footprint, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, right? But most of them would have gone into energy efficiency projects. So if being able to demonstrate with regards to energy efficiency initiatives goes a long way to helping you evaluate also whether you are GP1, GP2, GP3, or whether it can fall into GP4 as well. So in the construction sector, there's a huge drive in Malaysia to actually look at green buildings. And with green buildings, there's also attached sustainable construction methodologies. So you can actually ask for this type of information, because CIDB, which is the Construction Industry Board, has already been working with industry in this area with regards to not just energy efficiency, but also effective and sustainable construction methods, and as well as waste disposal. So for Malaysia, I mean, we have got energy audits that's run by the Energy Commission, right? And we've got cogen that's already been implemented quite a long way actually for quite a lot of existing industrial plants. So all of this adds up to that picture that you form of each transaction or each client that you have, as to which category it falls on. So these are just examples of where you can actually obtain information. Back to you, Ramsey. I think we're doing questions now, right?
Yes, with half an hour left.
Yep.
Let's review the questions from top, trying to cover everything. If we are running out of time, definitely we'll make sure that we try to answer this and send out all these response to all the participants here as well, together with the deck, of course. Now, I think this one way you can take it up. I think the second question, which is a note on capacity. An opinion is that FIs need to consider bringing in more technical expertise. Does subject matter experts with experience and skills and specific underlying issues, does forest, communities, labor, marine life, etc. My personal observation is that the industry leans on broad sustainability matters rather than having specific targets on specific issues. The latter would bring more impact and more walking the talk.
You want me to take the first two questions?
Now, that second question.
The second question, okay. I think the first question we've covered already to say that yes, it covers more than just environment. Okay, the second question is, I've actually worked with international banks before many years ago, implementing the Equator Principles, which is sort of like this, except is broader. And so if you actually talk about having experts in there, you can form a panel of experts, which will be how do you say, the way to go for me, because when you talk about credit evaluation and all, basically what you need to do is to be able to educate your people or your credit team, your credit risk assessment team, that what are the criteria that you're looking at, what are the risks that you have, and if you are able to educate them appropriately, and provide the necessary guidance documents with regards to what to evaluate, where to ask for information, what sort of information that you require, and then compile all of this, then go to your panel to evaluate, then that will probably be the more effective way of doing it, rather than have subject matter experts with experience and skills. So if you talk about a forest expert, a biodiversity expert, they look at biodiversity. It's not necessary that they understand the bigger picture of biodiversity in the context of climate change, or how climate change could impact biodiversity, and what is the bigger picture in that sense. I'm just giving this as an example. So if you have a panel, then you've got climate change experts, you've got biodiversity experts, you've got plantation experts, then you call as necessary. I think that will probably be the better way of doing, rather than having all these people on board as your employees. Yep, back to you, Ramsey.
Right. So Eric here asks, can a customer have more than one classification of GP? Example, both GP1 and GP3. Yes, I think I showed it earlier on the classification of CCPT. Both if you're meeting GP1 and GP3, you then be classified as C1. Kian Eng is asking, Bank Negara in its reporting template added an additional category of not as well classified. It was explained that this category is for those exposures yet to be classified or cannot be classified under the taxonomy. Example, does not meet GP1 nor GP2 but meet GP3. Is everyone from industry sharing the same understanding on this category? Okay. Let's go with the example given first. If you don't meet GP1 at all or GP2, you only have two choices there, either C3 or C5. And if you meet GP3, hopefully GP4 meets as well, then you can classify as C3. But if you feel like GP3 is being met, but GP4, the business transition on the climate change itself is not being met, then by right you should be able to put it as C5, mainly because but I would rather think that meeting GP3 would also means meeting GP4. Otherwise, it's very, like I said, to show that there's no significant harm to the environment, you must be able to show that GP4 is also being met. All right, so you can tag it as C3. Now, not as well classified is there to cater for those that are quite difficult to assess. For example, sovereign ratings bonds, for example, I think currently being exempted, but just to complete the whole picture of financial assets, you can put there as non as well classified. There are certain bonds, for example, issued by maybe World Bank. Those can be classified as not as well classified as well. In terms of transition, at the end of July, when we are supposed to report our first number for the first half of the year, you also need to classify your all outstanding clients in accordance to CCPT classification. So all your existing outstanding numbers should be classified as C1 to C5. But Bank Negara give the flexibility as well. That means if the review of the client's takes process only after June, that means your outstanding may still be not classified accordingly. That can be put as NEC for balancing matters. Then by the end of the year, once it's reviewed, it should be brought back to either C1 to C5. So the NEC really should not be used without any proper justification. Like, it should be used because one, it covers like sovereign rating. It's going to be very difficult to assess the government, and then and supranationals, and all those clients that have yet to be reviewed. So use NEC with extra cautions. Yeah. All right. Is high definition is okay. I'm not sure whether
I've got a question, Ramzi, which is basically
okay.
looking at a community, and somebody asked why should we be looking at employment chances and community when this is a climate change focus? I think, and there are additional questions that are attached to it, talking about social and governance, and talking about weighings of such considerations, and certain climate actions have negative impact on society and all.
Good.
So does this add on to, as no harm? I think, as you said earlier already, to address this question, if you allow me, as you said earlier already, when you look at the projections by the IPCC, which released their report just before COP26, it shows that the world is heating up. And when we head towards a 2-degree world, the projections and the modeling has already showed that the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere will burn more. And we can already see this in terms of the current situation that is. So they either get more fire or get more floods. And actually the area which is more stable based on the projections is the equator. So as we progress, the IPCC and other modeling has also showed that we're probably going to reach a 2-degree world in 5 years' time if we don't do what we're supposed to do. So what will eventually happen is you will see migration. right? From either the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. And since our area is more stable, if you're going to run away from fire, you're going to have to move south. And you have to move further south because areas like Portugal and North America are also burning a lot. So where can you go? So we're going to see a compression of socio-economic and geopolitical push and pull with regards to the countries that are in the equator or has already started managing climate change quite well. So the impact of climate change, therefore, has significant impact with regards to socio-economic and the social component within the management of climate change within your organization. So does that mean that you have to prioritize socio-economic impact over climate change management? No, the way that you should approach it is that it should be managed holistically. Basically, what we are looking at is that for you to assess the impact of climate change on your organization and in the business that you do, and within that consideration, consider the whole ESG spectrum, and in this case, looking at the S spectrum outside of Malaysia. In Malaysia, we are very much focused now because we've been in the news so much on the human rights aspects of it, migrant worker aspects of it, but we need to look outside of Malaysia and see and predict what the impact of that will have on our business and the way that our clients are doing business at the present moment. So focusing on employment and local community is one aspect of it. The other one is what sort of economic upheavals and opportunities that we might see arising from climate mitigation management and as we move further down the line. Now, working on climate change is a long game. It's not a short-term game, as I said earlier. Projections all go towards 2100. And actually all our modeling ends at 2100, but it's impossible for us to imagine the year 2100. So most of the time we project up to 2050. And as we head towards 2050, the time just gets shorter and shorter. And the effects get clearer and clearer. So as an organization, to plan for resiliency and to plan for sustainability of your business, this is what this effort is all about. Right. So you can allocate weightings for such consideration, but it should not outweigh the physical impact or the environmental impact. It should actually have equal weightage. But this needs to be adjusted as risk change, right? And this has to be reviewed either on an annually or quarterly basis based on your risk assessment process. Back to you, Ramzi.
Thank you. I think Winnie also asking what's the weightage attached to all these considerations.
Yeah.
Now, just by coming back to the social agenda, let me try to align it to how, at least how I see ESG risk in totality. Now, a lot of people think that once you touch environment, it doesn't have social impact. The environmental risk itself has, climate risk somewhat falls under environmental risk. The climate risk itself has impact on the social side. That one you need to assess accordingly. Now, the social objective that under S can also include other agendas. So bear in mind, climate risk is one of the agendas that we need to resolve under sustainability risks. A few other agendas under social, for example, eradicating poverty, gender equalities, and those are totally a different agenda that you want to address accordingly. And this is where the Ccpt has yet to capture those elements yet, but SC probably, SC taxonomy has actually captured those. And when we are reviewing this Ccpt when we move along, but we would just want to focus on climate change first. Now, that is the main agenda within the Ccpt. Well, if we start adding on other social agendas like eradicating poverty, that means giving out housing loans to a low-cost housing can be considered as meeting social agenda. But that should not be diluting the climate risk assessment. So try to separate that agenda, while meanwhile as a strategy and overall business, you need to really put a weightage on it. Of course, sometimes you really want to go for poverty of education, and along the way you may somewhat classify that become like C5, for example, or C3 for that matters. Then it depends on your risk appetite. your preference and your business strategies. Okay, I do hope that I explain, because a lot of people think when we touch on climate risk, there's nothing social about it, and that's I would rather emphasize there's a social impact on climate risk. So next questions, and I'm happy to see a lot of questions. So please join CCPTIG and put out more questions like this. Now, a key challenge of assessing against GP1 is the quantum. How much GHG emissions direct reduction is considered as acceptable and meeting GP1? Oliver came up with like 5% year-on-year maybe would include offset, scope 3, or only operational emissions. Now, this is where most of us are looking, how do we quantify climate risk itself? Currently, very much qualitative. We look at qualitative, but if you notice, not many people, first and foremost, they have yet calculate even scope 1 or scope 2. And scope 3 is even harder to even calculate, right? And I will urge everybody to start looking at this. How do we quantify for it? And then only we can start asking whether it's acceptable or not, and meeting GP1 or not. But ultimately, all of us are moving towards one direction, which is neutral carbon or zero carbon. And this, you can use a lot of standards. Like you can use SBTI, PCAF out there. You can use what do you call that, GHG protocol to calculate that. But ultimately, we try to make it neutral carbon or zero carbon, and according to the Paris Accord. So that would be the target. I think this is about journey. It's not whether this level is acceptable, that level is acceptable, but we're trying to move towards that as industry. You want to add on anything on that?
Yeah, I was, the thing is that I think when you talk about quantum of reduction, right, it's up to your customer to show you what their plans are and how they plan to move on a sustainable basis to net zero, as you said, if their plan is to go net zero. There could be some customers that are going towards carbon neutral. There's also nothing wrong with it. There's many ways of managing strategy. It's then for you and your team in your financial institutions to assess whether, number one, the qualifications and the quantifications that they've provided to you is rational, is real, and how they relate it to their business sustainability. At the end of the day, we must never forget that managing climate change is important, but ensuring business sustainability is also equally important. So the relationship between the quantum of carbon reductions that you plan and how they do it based on their cash flow projections and all, I think is more important for the banks. It's not that you are forcing or you are asking all your customers to go to net zero immediately. Some companies may be able to do it, some companies may not be able to do it. So how is then the strategy for the financial institution is how do you deal with this? Right. Yeah. And if they are able to demonstrate rational cash flow projections and drive towards a net zero plan, then there is no reason for you to say that they don't meet any of GP2, let's say, for example, or GP4, for example, because what they in essence have done is to present to you a rational transition plan, right? So that has to be taken into consideration. That setting targets per year is fine for the bank, but is it rational for each and every one of your customers? That's a question that you should ask.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So and Julie asked, per CCPT, GP assessments are based on economic activities, example, loan purpose, not based on sectors. EU taxonomy looks at sectors. Can we have clarification, please? Add on GP1 and GP2 assessments. True enough. The CCPT look at, especially GP1 and GP2 look at transactional, they look at the purpose of the business activities as well. It's not just loans purpose, but even for investment part as well. And we're going to talk about insurance in the session 3 later on. But what OI has done in covering these sectors is to show what are the examples within each sector that can be considered under GP1 and GP2. I hope that clarifies the flow of the chart, the deck just now.
Yeah, we're not saying, sorry, Ramzi, if I may add on, chime in a little bit. We're not saying that the examples that we've given you, you must evaluate by economic sectors. It's just that it's easier for you to consider what the risks are. Different sectors have got different risks, and different sector has got different climate mitigation pathways. So in a way, let's say, for example, you get a loan that is to build a new plant. And yes, you consider that loan in its entirety and in its isolation, but you also have to, you can't get away from considering the risk arising from the impacts, right? Because different sectors, different risks, like I said, with regards to climate mitigation and different economic outlook risks as well. You do that in a way. So what we are saying is we've provided you the examples. You can include it in your risk criteria in that sense when you look at it as you do your own evaluation. Back to you, Ramsey.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one. I think Chung asks, how do we know that the data being provided are accurate to be used for the FIs? So, well, like Maybank, we do subscribe to certain service providers. Of course, the validation of the data, we expect the process takes place within the service providers. But what we notice is those data are normally coming from the sustainability report issued by the respective clients and companies. Because that would apply across, especially for public listed companies. That would help us to collate the data. But most importantly, when you ask clients and to provide certain information so that you can assess the GP1s and all the way to GP5, this is rather, I would say, subjective because the client may say whatever they want to say, right? But it's also looking and probing further. It's like credit evaluation altogether. I may want to say, okay, the clients may say certain things. You may want to come up with some review on validating those, or you may want to commit, especially the commitment. You may want to revisit again the commitments during the review. But the data that you collect normally coming from industry that provides a good benchmark. So if, for example, benchmark for industry is at particular number, a company may overshoot the number or putting a very a very good number that probably outside the benchmark of industry. So that you can use it as a benchmark. A lot of times still at the end of the day, it's just could be used as a proxy. But what we also, at least in Maybank, we're trying to, whenever we come up like scope 1, 2, 3, we also ask ourselves, how do we ensure that public would really understand and also really believe in the data that we provide for. No, otherwise become short sendiri lah, right? So we can always use external auditor, internal auditor, it's a third line of defense, and to assure public that these numbers are as per what it is in the portfolio based on assumptions. Even then, calculating scope 3, for example, has a lot of assumptions in there, and it could vary from one to another. So yet again, for me, as long as it gives you a starting point of your journey, then that's okay, because you will foresee that the data maybe not clean or maybe not available. JC3 SC5 was set up earlier, I think last year, to really look at the data requirements under climate change that will be included there. So please provide your data requirements to JC3 SC5 for them to collect. Right? Yep.
If I may add on, the feedback that we get from the smaller sectors is that they don't understand what is scope 1, scope 2. Don't even talk about scope 3. So consideration with regards to what type of data, I think you need to spell it out very clearly to your customers, particularly the smaller caps and the small medium enterprises, as to what sort of data that you need. Give them as much help as possible with regards to calculation and why you need the data, so you provide context to them. And also to ensure that the data that you get is as clean as possible, so that you can actually make an evaluation. If not, it's for a large sector of industry that it's difficult to obtain the data. And I'm not even talking about scope 3. Even for the bigger companies, there's problems with scope 3. So
yep.
All right.
I think the next question is quite relevant, which I didn't mention much earlier. But The question is, in the case of classifying the equity investment exposure, the investment is not transactional based, but rather an investment on the whole entity. Number one, how do we ensure reasonable and accurate classification on GP1 and GP2, which should be based on fractional level? Number two, we invest in a company A's equity, their main business activities, example, manufacturing of normal consumer goods. It's not directly relevant to climate change mitigation and adaptation. However, this company has pledged for net zero in year 2050 and planned for gradual carbon reduction. Does it meet GP1 then? Good questions. Equity investment is similar to when we take loans for working capital. You are financing the main business activities of the company. And how do we classify that? In this case, if the business activities does not meet GP1 and GP2, as I said earlier, it means either C3 or C5. Now, the rest, in terms of whether the company has taken sufficient remedial efforts and commitment to be qualified as GP4, that would determine whether C3 or C5. So most equities, if they are not in the business of mitigation and adaptation, it will fall normally in C3. Even a lot of banks, and unless they clean up the portfolio to make it greener and full 100, the majority is greener, then it will fall under C3 if they have taken sufficient remedial efforts. So I think even if I look at my own bank, for example, I probably classify my bank as C3 right now, unless for equity purpose. And this is what we're trying to ask Bursa to help out to classify upfront so that all of us can use the same classification throughout the industry. Hopefully that materialize. Otherwise, all of us have to assess ourselves and hopefully it doesn't deviate much from one to another. This is some the challenges that we are facing. Now, bear in mind also, a lot of people still asking, like, how do we move then to C1? How do we move from C3 to C1? Look, a lot of time it will be under C5 and C4 already. And that's why we're pushing towards more on the transitioning first. To move towards supporting, which is a good thing. That means you need to really look at your business activities and start asking how do we contribute to GP1 and GP2, rather than just producing something that definitely would cause some harms to the environment. And this is where the differentiation is. C3 is way better than even C5 already. That's how I see things. But I think you don't have to focus way too much on C1. It should be focusing on C3 and above first. Right? So there's another question. There's a risk. Sorry, we have 3 more minutes. There is a risk of relying on certification. How do you think? What do you think about that, Oi? How much reliance on certifications do you want to do?
Certification is your first step. Basically, it's a way for the company to demonstrate to you that they care about what they're doing and they are concerned with ensuring that they adhere to the do no harm principle. However, certification will not give you a transition plan. So the client, your client will still have to give you a plan how they are planning to mitigate, adapt, and to remediate with regards to transition. So certification will talk about GP3 as a criteria as the first step. Then you still have to evaluate whether they are mitigating and adapting to climate change with regards to their processes and the procedures. And that one you cannot get from certification. You have to still ask for the information. They still have to show you the plan. And then you evaluate based on the transaction that you are that they are asking for in that case. So you still have to do, based on the transaction as opposed to the company, right? If you are looking at a transactional level, then where it comes to investment, then it's a different type of evaluation. Again, they still have to demonstrate to you that they have a mitigation plan that is rational, as I said earlier, that is takes into consideration their sustainable, their business sustainability, cash flow, etc., which is very, very important. Right, Ramzi, what do you think?
I'm agreeable. I think, okay, so for CCPT IG, we do look at certification. Sometimes like the Malaysians CPOs, for example, certification. We look at it. We ask ourselves whether the contents within each certification do meet GP3, GP4, and whether this will be qualified to call it as meeting GP4. So if you have any certification that you want to bring about and let us review it, we are more than happy to look at it together. And then we can say, okay, this one, if you have the certification, you can be considered as meeting GP4 or GP3 for that matter. We can do it together. So far, we're looking at few certifications already from real estate side, from I think we are looking at manufacturing now. So please do come and discuss with us on all these certifications. But if you don't want to come to CCPTIG as endorsement, that's fine. All my suggestion is really to look at the contents of the certification, because not all certification do address every single part of GP3 or GP4. For example, some may zoom into pollution, but there's another part in GP3 talking about waste management and natural resources that may not be part of the certification. So please look at the details of certification rather than just relying solely on certification.
Yeah, I know we've got 3 more minutes. I just like to add on to that. Maybe we can address the rest of the questions via mail or whatever. Sorry, this is very important because for everybody's information, there's 2 pieces of legislation now, one in the EU and one in the US, that basically says out of 6 sectors that is identified within the legislation, companies which are exporting to the EU and to the US must start reporting with regards to the carbon content of its product. So in this case, then we are looking at another type of level of certification, which is a life cycle assessment. Maybe you're talking about type 2, type 3 certification level, which is then very much focused on climate. But this is climate and carbon on the product itself. So at the end of the day, the company still needs to be able to demonstrate what its plan is to first, number one, reduce carbon emission within its product, embodied within its product, and to reduce carbon emission from its operations. So these things are important because legislation around the world is already beginning to take off. And so it will have bearing, particularly in the manufacturing, oil and gas sector as well, and plantation and timber sector. Over to you, Ramzi.
Okay. I think let's end the session 1 for now. You can always ask again in session 2 and session 3 later on. We have to address some of the questions. We are at the end of session 1. I think the time doesn't permit us to do so. Should you have any further queries or would like to join us in the CCPT IG, do contact us using the email address given in the slide. I do hope to see you all again in the next session, and thank you so much for your attention and participation. Thanks, Oi, for being a co-speaker together with me today. And I bid you all assalamualaikum and see you all in the next session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.
Over to you, Shirley.
Okay, like Oi Ching mentioned, for the unanswered questions, we will liaise with the respective presenters to provide the responses, and this will be communicated accordingly. Now, for those who have registered for the next session, because I see the numbers reducing by the minute, for those who have registered for the next session for banks or both sessions, please stay on. For those who have registered specifically for the ITO session, please feel free to join at 2 p.m. based on the link provided in the chat box earlier. With that, I pass it on to you.
Hey, sorry, can you give me like 3 minutes? Just
Sure, Ramzi.
yeah.
Short comfort break. Yeah.
For those who have registered for the bank session, please stay, and we will resume in 2 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Hope we all are refreshed.
Yes, is Oi Ching there as well? Yep.
Yes, very
Still.
much so.
Okay, so please take it on. Thank you.
Over to
Right.
you, Ramzi.
Sure. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. For those who have joined session 1 earlier in the morning, thank you for staying on. And to those who have just joined this session, I bid you assalamualaikum and a good morning. Welcome to session 2. To those who do not know me yet, my name is Ramzi. I'm heading the group CRO office in Maybank. I'm one of the members in JC3SC1 that looks at risk management, representing Maybank as a co-lead for the CCPT implementation group, together with AIA and CIMB as the secretariat. With me today as the co-speaker is Madam Fang Oi Cheng from KPMG, who has been helping the CCPT IG to come up with the contents for today's training. Now, without further ado, let us look at the agenda for today. And I think if we can save some time here, we can address some of the Q&A not being addressed in the earlier session. We have covered earlier with great details on the GPs. For this session, we will cover the CCPT implementation itself, specifically for the banks, and include case studies on the implementation. Oi will provide her insights from industry point of view, while I will share some of the key initiatives undertaken by my bank and other bank members in CCPT IG. If your bank has yet to register as a member of CCPT IG, I will urge you to do so quickly by emailing to ccptig@bnm.gov.my. The email address will be provided to you also at the end of the presentation. Okay, so how do we implement CCPT? It would be best not to create a totally separate process and instead to embed CCPT into banking value chain. In general, we have divided banking value chain into 6 categories, all the way from product development, financing application, credit evaluation, client onboarding, credit monitoring and recovery, and account closure. Now, while GP1 and GP2, let me close it. Okay. While GP1 and GP2 are very much on the financing application loan, but I rather let's start with the number 1 process first lah. Product development. When we try to classify green classification in the retail products, for example, it would be best to create a product that you already pre-identify as green. It would be much easier if you do that compared to if you try to segregate. Say, for example, you lump everything into auto vehicle products, and then you will have to dissect each one of them to classify which one is falls under green or non-green. That would be more difficult rather than creating a separate product that already pre-identified as green, and all that at origination level you can classify that straight away under that product, then it will be easier to report under CCPT. So that would be my advice. Even at product development, you should be thinking on how do you want to categorize your product classification already. So that would be best for implementing CCPT. Now, when it comes to financing application for GP1 and GP2, I don't have to repeat GP1, GP2, I hope, because we deliberated a lot already in session 1. Is how do we then want to embed such criteria into your assessment financing investment criteria. Detailed guidelines need to be put up for the front office. This can come from risk management or sustainability office as part of their business as usual financing investment activities. Okay. Along the way, feel free to put in a Q&A for the chat for us to answer, right? So that we can try to answer. This is a webinar. Unfortunately, we can't have both interactions, right? So approach 3, really to establish ideal and consistent method to assess economic activities by collaborating among FIs. Okay, this is where CCPT IG normally discuss a lot about how do we standardize things. Sometimes we ask ourselves, is it reasonable for a bank to classify as green when it comes to another bank, it becomes non-green? See, for example, Maybank may want to classify auto vehicle loans, maybe electrical vehicle normally we classify as green, but hybrid has many variations. Some totally full hybrid, which is plugged in through for electrical charge. Some may not have such plug-in as well. How do we then segregate between these two? And some banks may go to even more quantifying. They will go with carbon emission numbers and quantifying it through there. What would be the expected carbon emission from each model of the car? How do we standardize this? Does it make sense for clients to go for one bank, not making it to green, and the other banks classify it as green? This is one of the topics and it really keep recurring because we see whether there's a need to standardize or not across industry. Okay, so please join, be hot about it, be more transparent so that we all can discuss for the benefit of industry. Now, approach 4, identify data. Okay, as we mentioned earlier in session 1, how do we get this data? Of course, ideally, we can get it from service providers. But again, those are very much coming from sustainability reports of public listed companies, which number one may not be suitable for banks that have a lot more of BB and SMEs clients. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the banks have no choice but to get this data directly from clients. And on top of that, it makes more complicated if it's online application because there's no intervention from the RMs to ask clients. The clients have to submit the information directly from the internet. Now, how do we ensure validation? It, again, is all about due diligence. You can come back to the clients and ask, or you can actually take it good faith and review it within a year and see what would be the, or you can ask documentation for that. Again, it provides you a good starting point to actually engage your clients to understand where the transition plan is. So hopefully that would drive the industry and the clients also to think about transition plan and remedial efforts towards climate change, right? Approach 5, communicate this identified data information required to be furnished by borrowers. A lot of banks take approach of sending the duty question itself directly to the customers, discussing together, like what Oi mentioned in session 1 earlier. A lot of them may not be even understand what scope 1 is, for example. And I think that's why whenever we ask for data, it needs to be very specific. It needs to be clear. And I would think that we need to also standardize the number of questions that we need to ask our clients. It is painful enough for clients to really answer from one particular bank, and if they have relationship with 5 banks, for example. Imagine if all 5 banks ask 5 different sets of duty questions, and one of them maybe have like hundreds of questions. Um, and clients may be, in terms of customer experience, may really deteriorate for the industry. A lot of other clients also are worried about asking questions when this will impact the credit process or not. And at least for my bank, we do consider ESG considerations in our credit approval process, so that we make sure that it's aligned to our strategies and our values as well. So these are the approaches that we feel that should be embedded. The FIs and the banks particularly need to come up with your own set of duty questions to that. Anything you want to add, Oi, on GP1, GP2 assessments?
No, I think we've highlighted enough the fact that data is always a constraint.
Yes.
Getting the data is one thing. The other thing is, after you get the data already, from the financial institution's perspective, is how well do you understand the data? That's the other thing. So capacity building and deciding what type of data is very important. And what you said with regards to ensuring that you you ensure that the questions that you ask is as broad as possible to cover all aspects that you're looking at, and detailed enough to ensure that you get the data that you want without overwhelming the clients. I used to do sustainable supply chain audits and due diligence. So you got one company that asked 5 questions, and these are real questionnaires. So they have already been applied to industry, and you've got one company that asked 50 questions. So the poor supplier itself is looking at it and going, what am I supposed to do with this? Because one is fairly shallow, and the other one goes down to really, really detailed. So some level of standardization or agreement among the FIs does need to happen in this case. What is most useful to you, and what is basically a nice to have question, but serve no purpose or has minimum purpose with regards to the CCPT classifications. Back to you, Ramsey.
Thank you. A lot more questions are coming in, which is all good. Because a lot of time people ask about this GP3. What if they don't meet GP1 and GP2 and they meet GP3? Again, actually we asked this and deliberated this in JC3, SC1 a lot, because we noticed that is the missing combination, right? I think in terms of process-wise, we look at first the GP1 and GP2. So if you meet GP1, if in this example normally you don't meet GP1, right? Then it becomes either C3 or C5. And within C3 and C5, it never asks whether you meet GP3 anymore. It only asks whether you meet GP4. So that's how the flow is normally, because at transactional level, someone asked to define transactional. So transactional would refer to either when you want to give financing, or you want to buy equity or bonds or other instruments, and then you need to classify it. So each so-called transaction needs to be classified according to CCPT. And this is where when you look at the flow, there's no need to look at GP3 when GP1 and GP2 are not being met. This is something that I think we still need to discuss with Bank Negara again. Should we want to create one more, perhaps not meeting GP1 and GP2, but still meet GP3? The way I said, if you meet GP3 and but you don't have GP1, GP2, you should be ending up to say that you already meeting GP4 as well, and therefore C3 will be sufficient rather than putting NEC. All right. So back to GP3, when you look at banking value chain, how do we assess that? So we look at during the credit evaluation itself, and of course the credit monitoring. How do we do that? Really setting up risk acceptance criteria would be good, because during credit evaluation, you need to see whether you meet all the regs. And regs, all this while, probably you have it already, but those may include maybe coming from directly from credit or reputational perspective, but now you have to start asking yourself what be the RAC for under climate change and ESG in general to be considered together with other particular RACs. Yeah, so this would help in terms of decision making. It be smoother to really define where the boundaries are, so that you don't have to keep pushing to the committees and start asking whether this is where we are heading or not. Um, a clear right or risk appetite to that matter is no deforestation, for example, as adopted by Maybank. We will clearly put there no deforestation. That means anything that across sectors, you may not go to that. But again, deforestation alone is need to properly define, because there's also deforestation on reserve land, and there's also the deforestation on other types of forests. For example, are those allowed, or replantation is acceptable as mitigation to certain parts. So this needs to be properly defined within RAC. And the second approach is all monitoring activities should be risk-based and must include issues such as biodiversity, ecosystem, as well as human health risk. So again, as we mentioned earlier in session 1, GP4 talks a lot about climate change and climate risk. The GP3 really talks about other matters within environmental risks such as pollution, biodiversity, as well as the usage of natural resources and waste management too. Approach 3, embedding assessment on portfolio's progress towards climate supporting category like C1. I think Banera has started to ask around those who have, especially on the pilot banks, in terms of where would be our strategy once we classify our portfolio. So you have all this C1 to C5. Do you have targets to move from C4 and C5, which is the watch list category, into transitioning and supporting? I think targeting towards supporting 100% is a bit too ambitious, but it's best to really move progressively towards transitioning C1, C2, and C3. So that's my preference, and while we also looking at the scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3, we look at from that perspective, how do we target towards neutral carbon and zero carbon in the future, and that would be translating into our portfolio of C1 to C5, and that's how we're gonna use it for our portfolio strategy. Approach 4 is to identify environmental friendly activities that are generally green to prevent pollution from one medium to another. You know, the word green can be used extensively, and this is the why another emerging risk suddenly appears within sustainability risk, which is greenwashing. We have to be very, very careful on any initiative that we undertake, really addressing the root cause or not. The root cause is really the climate change itself, and we have to ask ourselves, okay, are these really addressing that or not? A lot of times, sometimes we put in, but the impact towards climate change mitigation adaptation is sometimes quite vague. And sometimes very difficult, especially when it's so hard to quantify it, and therefore it can be accused or be considered as greenwashing at the end. So we do not want that. Where we can, we try to standardize it and really debate it. But this is something that I think all of us have to really emphasize on and see whether it address the root cause in the first place. Approach 5, obtain insurance that the certification can strongly demonstrate substantial contribution to climate. And so again, it's about certification. A lot of time we tend to rely on certification. So again, how do we obtain assurance? You have to go through the detail of the certification itself. If you feel that certification can give you that comfort that it meets GP3, then yes, you can rely upon it. And it depends on who also issue the certification, right? And this you need to see and work together with those who are issuing the certification. Ccpt TIG will help you out in looking at all this certification together, and then we can endorse it at industry level. Oi, before we move on to GP4, anything that you want to add on this one?
Yeah, the thing is that when, as you say, GP3 is talking about, the principle of do no harm. But with climate change, as we've spoken from this morning up to now, it's much broader than that with regards to the do no harm to environment. So it's best to actually, when you talk about monitoring activities and all, to ensure that the KPIs, key performance indicators that you have from your client's perspective, or that has been provided to you from your client, is actually based on ESG requirements, so environmental, social, and governance as well. So that's important to bear in mind, not just ask for climate data. How overall management and overall programs are also very important.
I totally agree. For credit monitoring, so along the way, you may feel like you're meeting GP3 or even GP4, and suddenly within a year, then there's a adverse news on that particular client. Maybe they were accused of polluting rivers, water supply, and things like that. You need to really revisit your assumptions here during credit monitoring process and review it. If they really contradict with the law and others, then you need to revisit whether still you're meeting GP3 or not. And this is, I think, one way is also to validate whether the clients are really walking the talk lah, so to say. But then it falls under then GP5 later on to reclassify that to GP5.
Yeah,
All right.
I think the other thing is also when we talk about credit monitoring, you must never forget that climate change does not take precedence over business resilience and business sustainability. So you must do it hand in hand, because at the end of the day, it's all about protecting you as an organization and protecting your client as well. So it's a win-win situation if you are able to focus on both equally in that sense. Right, Ramji, can I move on to the next slide?
Yep. Yep. So GP4. Same thing as GP3. You really need to look at both at the evaluation stage and the monitoring stage. But most importantly, we ourselves have to ask what would be the strategy in managing the portfolio when you realize that some clients may not be aligned to the ESG framework that you establish. And also, how do you assist business to transition to more sustainable practices? A lot of, I think, in my view, when we discuss with clients, they are willing to do transitions. I think it's a matter of, number one, impact. They want to know what's the impact on their balance sheet, of course, P&L. But of course, when you have to show the evidence that moving towards be prepared for climate change is best way, and to mitigate it and be prepared for that. Number two is also about whether, and normally this is a normal question to ask, like, what would be the incentive for them to do so, whether there be a better pricing or not, whether and then who's gonna, what would be the capital investment to do remedial efforts, and these are the normal questions that probably being asked by clients. I think it's all a matter of industry efforts to really influence our clients to really move towards better remedial efforts in abating climate change. Approach two is to widen the scope of investing, insurance, lending assessment criteria to include broader ESG considerations for more holistic due diligence. Here, I think we purposely put in the word ESG rather than just a climate risk per se within JP4. I think Oi mentioned earlier, we also look at also social considerations here as well. You don't want suddenly that it would, disturb. So, for example, the Aborigines reliving the area, for example, or suddenly being accused of having contravened the labor law, for example, that would be also including one of the ESG considerations for more holistic due diligence. Approach three, establish baseline expectation on business broader environmental strategy. Really, you have to work together with the business, understand where they are and what would be the agreed transition plan for us to help them out. Oh, I thought it's my battery. Oh, you better charge your battery now.
I forgot to turn
Approach.
on my switch. Sorry.
It's okay. Approach 4, strengthen assessment criteria and conduct assessment to determine effects and significance of renewable efforts undertaken by businesses. This is a journey. I can see that from our engagement in CCPTIG, most of us, either not very ready yet, but we still want to pursue this journey. And it's a baby steps, I would say. We are very at the infant stage right now, but we will. It is a dynamic. There's no so-called the 100% correct method. There's nobody we can claim that they have the right methodology to really start with the journey. It's all about learning process, and we will learn and adopt accordingly throughout this journey. So all I'm saying is these criteria that we set earlier, we need to keep reassessing and see whether it's valid or not, and it has to align to our values and strategy. So, you want to add on anything here?
Yeah, I think what you said lastly is very important. The strategy that you approach, the strategy that you develop as financial institutions, albeit in your investment strategy, in your lending portfolios and anything else in between there, has to be fit such that it addresses the risks that you have identified for yourself as an organization. So as Ramsey says, adaptation and adjustment needs to be done. The other thing to remember is when you speak to your clients about your customers about transition and all of that, there is nothing that basically says you have to impose a timeline, right? It's basically up to your client and up to your customers to say that this is how I'm going to do this. And then the question then is, as Ramsey says, what is your risk appetite with regards to the timeline that the client has identified, right? As has been shown in our the banking sector and the financial sector in Malaysia, different banks have a different appetites. So you might reject that bank that client because their transition plan may not be rigorous enough. Another bank may consider, I'm not saying loan, I'm not saying approve, I'm saying may consider them at a better lighting because they have a bigger risk appetite. But at the same time, as Ramsey says in our previous section, how do we want to standardize this across the sector itself, especially for banks in this case? To prevent the question is, why does this bank reject me and yet the other bank accept me? Your criteria and agreement across all financial institutions, banks in this case, about how you want to evaluate and all of that, I think that there has to be a minimum baseline that has to be established in this case. And it is something that should be discussed and explored further to see whether it fits and is able to manage all risks for the banks in this case. At the end of the day, whatever that this is happening is all about risk management. Hence, Ramsey, as head of risk at Maybank, is talking about this, and it's something that is very important. And it's not talking about climate change. Climate change is already a present risk for all companies and Malaysia in general and globally. So this has to be addressed in that perspective.
Yep,
Back
well
to you,
said, well
Ramsey.
said. Yeah. So in Maybank, we believe in just transition. It means we do transition that makes sense. We can't just simply focus on climate change, reduce this, but at the same time jeopardize the social impact. And that's something that we're trying to avoid. It's all about how do we move together. GP5, I think I mentioned in section 1 earlier, especially for those regional banks, you may want to have a prohibited economic activities as a part of your risk appetite statement. I'm not profound of having risk appetite statement to mention illegality in the risk appetite statement, because by virtue of illegality, you shouldn't be doing that in the first place, and I don't believe it should be part of risk appetite statement. But however, for those with regional presence, it is important to put in that RAS, mainly because there are some legality issues that may differ from one country to another. So one country may say yes, some country may say no, and that's why the RAS would provide a standardized platform to all the branches and subsidiaries within that regional banks. Approach to ensure economic activities undertaken by prospect prospective customers do not violate any environmental. A lot of people ask, how do we ensure that? How do we know that they're telling the truth? Yeah, as I said, I think best to really have a proper undertakings in the LOUs, for example. The clause has to be very clear, and this declaration coming from clients can be used against them should we found something in the future that contravenes with the GP5. Okay, and this is the approach 3, where banks may obtain written statements to enforce such clauses. Okay, if nothing else, I'll pass to Oi to cover the embedding CCPT into business operations. I probably now leave to Oi to run the show, mainly because a lot of these are very much at industry level. I will chip in terms of how Maybank put in all this into places. I would say that the next slides really much talks about more the similar to how TCFD implementation or TNFD implementation across the FIs and the banks. So over to you, Oi.
Thanks, Ramsey. Just before I start, I just need to add with regards to approach 2, where a lot of companies are asking, where do I find, what's the legal status of my target or my customer and all. Actually, there is a nice nifty approach where you can actually write to the Department of Environment, say, for example, to inquire about status of companies. And with social, you can actually write to the Labor Minute Department to ask about social status. If you do it on a confidential and on a one-to-one basis, you generally will be able to get that information. So there are ways of actually obtaining the information. So the question is, how do you embed it into your SOPs or into your credit evaluation process? So what I'm going to talk about now is how to embed CCPT into business operations. And for those of you with matured ESG management programs and all, you'll find that it sounds strangely familiar, because it is. At the end of the day, when you talk about climate change management and all within your processes, it still falls within the governance strategy. You talk about strategic vision, you talk about roles and responsibility, your business operating model, and your supporting functions. So, and it shouldn't differ. It should basically be what you're doing now with regards to your credit evaluation and with regards to your governance structures, your ESG governance structures. And with the risk assessment process, you just add on the additional or increase, as Maybank, Ramsey has stated, Maybank has already started looking at its climate risk and all of that. And if that rises in terms of risk criteria and in risk criticality, then it becomes something that you have to manage as a matter of priority within your organization, because your risk profile basically says that. So the same process applies with how you look in terms of your credit evaluation. You just need to add on the ESG criteria, which I hope most of you have already started doing. So what we also need to ensure is that when we do credit risk assessment, and this is working with international banks a long time ago, and even now, a lot of the feedback from the CRM personnel is that they don't understand. So the question then is, how much of a detail do you need to provide with regards to looking at a business operating manual model, and also with regards to the supporting functions or the supporting information that you provide. And the realization, as with ESG, that this is not a standalone operation. So many departments will be involved. So the first sector that we're going to look at is with regards to governance and strategy. Most of you would have got this down pat already, because you have been looking at ESG management for a long time. So the question, and you've also been looking at risk management for a long time. So the question now is with regards to credit evaluation and with regards to the forward-facing, client-facing side of things, how do you expand that to include ESG risk and all? And this is from what we've been talking about, GP1 and all the way up to GP5, the CCPT taxonomy implementation requirements. You would have been working on this already. The question is, based on what we have discussed earlier, the depth and the level of information that you ask, and being able to address the issue of capacity and understanding the data. So governance structures, you have got it already. Roles and responsibilities, you have got it already. And as Ramzi has shown, it will probably fall onto the chief risk officer of your organization. And added to that, you also got the BBI and the BBIT. BBI, Bank Negara has informed us, and I think you probably need to clarify, but Bank Negara from our discussion has informed us that it should serve as a guidance document for any financial institution actually looking to embed ESG within its operations, not just for the insurance sector. So this or the Islamic banking sector as well. So it becomes a useful tool to guide with regards to ESG functions and with regards to roles and responsibilities. Now, when it comes to risk management, we need to look at it from two business perspectives. Two business perspective in terms of banking value, in terms of your product development, all the way to recovery and account closure, and then your value chain as well for investment, your investment value chain. How do you go through the criteria of assessing your investment? But all of this, you have to remember, are front facing, and behind this, it still has to feed back to your overall ESG program and your risk assessment process for your organization at some point in time. So the structure of the risk management processes has to, and you have to ensure that there is communication with your ESG program and your ESG risk assessment, as well as your investment value chain, because all of this needs to form a picture of where the bank is going, or where your financial institution is going with regards to not just climate management. Climate management forms a part of your ESG program, but the corporate responsibility, non-financial corporate responsibility bucket in totality. So that you have to make sure that connectivity is also developed, and that KPIs are being monitored, and your sustainability team is also aware, and then that is subsequently reported back to senior management and then to a board level. So in terms of business operation, so the main message here I'm trying to say is, don't consider this, don't develop this in isolation, develop this with connectivity to your overall ESG program, because instead of building your own social programs and all of that, you already have with your ESG program, the sustainability, the social aspects that you're already monitoring and measuring. So it's not in isolation in that sense. Similarly, also from your investment, when you look at investment sourcing and all, for some of you who are using fund managers, yes, you do have to eventually reach out to your fund managers, since the GP1, GP2 is talking about transaction. So you do have to have some communication with your fund managers, and in this case, alignment of the intermediaries does need to come into your discussion. So you can either do it as an organization by organization level, or you can do it as an industry level through the JC3. Ramzi, any comments with regards to that? When dealing with fund managers for investments?
Yeah. When we deal with fund managers, I mean, there's a lot of questions coming from asset managers actually, when they mandate come from the customers, and they ask, how do you want to communicate to the clients, and I think this is where again, talking to clients is very important. One hand on purchasing investment asset itself. So let me go back a bit. In banking side, when it comes to loans, we do have some proper relationship with the clients. You can ask questions, all right? At the investment side, it's going to be a bit more difficult to actually engage clients, because it's about purchasing and ensuring that those are already been classified as C1 to C5. And normally, very seldom people come back to the issuer of the bonds and equities and start asking all kind of duty questions. This need to be, that's why I said the objective setting has to be there. You're definitely right. How do we select your investment, and hopefully the classification can be done upfront based on whatever information that we have publicly. And that's why I think it's best also to get certain authorities like Bursa to really classify upfront. Now, asset managers are also similar, because they're purchasing instruments, but it's all about talking to your customers, and hopefully they will agree, okay, let's have C1 to C3 equity classification in their portfolio rather than having too many of C4 and C5. That would be helping out in terms of your product offerings lah. So that's my comment.
Yeah, thanks, Ramsey. The other thing is that if the asset managers are acting on your behalf, which is basically acting upon your instruction, then clarification with regards to the types of category that you wish to invest in, and that there is alignment between you and your fund manager is also very important. Also added on, complicating the issue is some of the banks are also having insurance products. Again, when you deal with tri-party or two-party, your insurance provider and your customer, communication then becomes very, very important to ensure that there is alignment and there is no miscommunication and misdefinition in this case. Because if you're acting on behalf of a big organization in terms of insuring the product and all, they might have their own definition. Financial institution might have their own definition. Bank might have its own definition. So how are you going to align that? That is very important in this case. And so communication and involving the rest of the ESG management within your organization, then it becomes very, very important particularly when we talk about reporting for disclosure, which is coming up really fast in this case. And then the use of information technology to help track and monitor, and how do you want to embed your IT systems or the use of AIs or artificial intelligence and all of that to build the necessary tools to track, monitor, and align and inform. Some banks are already fairly developed, and I think the larger Malaysian banks, probably we get Ramsey to speak about it a little bit, has already initiated some things. Is the smaller institutions that need to start thinking about how you want to capitalize on this. Ramsey?
Yeah, I think we do notice that a lot of banks are really starting to put CCPT into the system, especially on the loans origination system. I think we put a clause that you need to put a bit more flexibility to these requirements, because again, it is a very dynamic classification. While it is a stepping stone, but it is subject to review within like 2 years, 3 years, and therefore whatever amendments that you do to your technology and systems need to be a bit more flexible rather than hard coded into the system. So be mindful on that. It's best really to include due diligence questions within the loan origination system itself and build the logic from there, right? Then that would be more useful. AI and capabilities of analytics built in to assess where the clients are and what can we do in terms of our portfolio. Even in Maybank, for example, we try to even calculate the carbon emission upfront during the onboarding, so that it's easier for us to calculate scope 3 later on, which is, I would think, very ambitious, but it's something that we are embarking as well. So information technology would require some investment in there as well, but that would help you to really get a more accurate data as we have more information coming from clients.
Yeah, thanks, Ramsey. On the flip side, investing in AI and all of that means you're going to use more data centers and all, which means you're going to increase energy. So that might impact your carbon footprint and your energy transition plan. Yeah.
That's true.
Flip side to everything, every opportunity there's risk, right? So we've received quite a few questions with regards to case studies and all of that, and examples, right? Bearing in mind that Malaysia is fairly new in terms of CCPD, and we're still trying to, chart our path through and learning from the experience of the pilot organizations such as Maybank. So thank you very much to Ramsey for actually doing this and sharing his experience. And I think it's really useful. What we have put together is some case studies with regards to how companies are reporting and how they're evaluating with regards to different financial instruments being offered by banks. So this is just to give you a flavor of what the EU is doing and has done. And with regards to the level of reporting that is required. Now, Bank Negara Malaysia has taken the soft approach because they also understand that the level of knowledge and the level of capacity within Malaysia with regards to climate change, climate mitigation, and the more, especially in the financial sector, is limited. So we can't go full blown into climate mitigation and all as per what the EU has done. And what the EU did in terms of the taxonomy was actually developed over a period of 10 years. So they went through many iterations before we arrived at what it was eventually. And there was a whole level of socialization that was actually done. So in that regard, the application of, we're looking at Nordea, and we're looking at the application of the EU taxonomy on the forestry sector, lending to small, medium-sized corporates in the Nordic region. So if you look at GP1, if you were to apply the GP1 on this, it meets in the sense that it complies with SFM requirements in Sweden. There is regularly updated forest management plans. There is already a verified baseline on greenhouse gas emission and greenhouse gas, basically the carbon balance that they have, and the client is able to demonstrate or maintain increased capacity for carbon sequestration. So what happens with forest trees is that they capture the carbon, and that whole process is called carbon sequestration. And there is already demonstrated compliance to the EU minimum safeguard. So if we've been having questions with regards to asking about certification and all. So if you look at GP1, it just serves as a criteria, right, for certification. Just one criteria for assessing whether you fulfill the GP1 requirements or not. This is just as an example, GP1 criteria or not. And then, like I said earlier, you do have to ask for additional information with regards to what's their mitigation plan, what are the plans. Well, if you generally what we try to do is we ask the client, rather than ask straight up, what is your mitigation plan? We try to ask, what sort of programs do you have in place? You're doing sustainability forest management. You're probably talking about 50 to 100 years with regards to your plantation staying there. What is your cutting and planting plan? How have you verified the data? And also, these are actually very important information that you have to remember to ask and to include into your credit assessment criteria, so that your CRM, your credit relationship managers, are able to ask these questions. And in terms of financial treatments that they have, they also have purchased forest estate, and there is capital expenditure that needs to be done. There is also operational expenditure that needs to be done. Like I said, all of this has to be put into context of the resilience and sustainability of the business, not just about managing climate change. So you could have a client coming to you, customer coming to you and say, look, I got a very, very nice carbon mitigation plan, but their numbers don't fit with regards to OpEx and CapEx, right? And they also don't fit with regards to the P&L that they need to generate to make you happy as a bank. You need to know that your target or your client is able to fulfill and pay back the loan, right? So all of this needs to be taken into consideration. So climate mitigation and climate risk assessment forms just one part of this. So if you look at the evaluation and all the various assessment criteria that has been applied, and this is already been discussed, like I said earlier here, with regards to GP1. The only thing is there was a weakness with regards to the minimum requirements for safeguards for the taxonomy. So let's say, for example, reference to OECD or the IFC international, IFS or IFC, I can't remember, based from the World Bank with regards to monetary criteria and all. They have already very set environmental and social criteria developed, especially if you're going to do due diligence and also going to do EIAs. This already has a guide that has been developed. So in conclusion, they were not able to provide sufficient information on social safeguards, you get a partial alignment. But for Malaysia, it's probably an alignment already, yeah, in that sense. So that's how we will look in terms of evaluation and in terms of reporting, and that's how we will look with regards to the GP1 criteria. And in this case, we're talking about corporate loans. This process and this thinking process and evaluation process can be applied, of course, to any other sector that has been developed already, or that is asking for evaluation. So in this case, we're looking at GP2. And GP2 primarily with regards to adaptation and how has that occurred. So the criteria for based on the information that's provided for the EU taxonomy is looking at sustainable forest management and also comply the activity, and for the company complies with the do no significant harm criteria assessment, and there's compliance with the EU taxonomy minimum safeguard. Bank Negara don't have a defined minimum safeguard, right, Ramsey? Except the do no harm criteria, right?
Yep.
So in this case, if you are able to provide all this information your client, that you ask from your clients, you will be able to then fulfill with regards to reporting to Bank Negara on the GPs that is required mid of this year. So that's basically to quickly run through, because bearing in mind we are on time constraint. We've got until 12 o'clock, and there's a lot of questions, so I'll just quickly run through. In this case, is looking at GP5.
Sorry to interject.
Yeah.
I think it's best to clarify that GP1s and GP2 look transactional level.
Correct.
The one that we just explaining is how do you see mitigation and adaptation fits into the business activities. So if you are purchasing equities and even financing on the working capital, all these would you need to look at whether the business has sufficient mitigation adaptations, transition plans, and how then we're gonna approach whether GP1 and GP2 are being met.
Yeah, and in this case, when we talk about the transitional plans and all, we're looking at GP3 already, where the organization itself, the business itself, basically says, I plan to do no harm, and this is my plan to do this. So how do you evaluate with regards to the organization? So what they did was to look at the organization for retail loans and how they have applied. The company has applied with regards to, like I said earlier, what we showed earlier is with regards to what we say as eco label for buildings, green labels for buildings, right? The green building label. So if your client and the company saying that all my buildings I'm going to go for green label, and they show that they are able to obtain gold green label or platinum green label, then it's one step towards ensuring that you do no harm already. So that criteria needs to be applied. So in this case, for criteria for the organization does that. And however, unfortunately for this, when they evaluated the client, not all information was provided, and there was information provided as qualitative instead. So when you have qualitative information, as we have been talking from this morning up to now, data must be provided on a quantitative basis, and therein lies the difficulty, right? For property developers, for REITs and all of that, where many things might not be under their control, how do you liaise with them to ensure that you get enough data that you require? So that is the issue. So if you've got clients that are already talking with regards to providing you qualitative, for the moment, probably you can say, yes, I can evaluate this, but you need to have a set plan as to when you plan to transition with your clients in providing hard data. Because at the end of the day, when it talks about evaluation of the company, like in this case, Kaisa Bank, with regards to compliance to the EU taxonomy, you still need the hard data to be able to demonstrate this. And with the hard data, as Ramsey has said already, you can be as detailed as possible, or you can tread the middle ground. So it's a very fine line where you becomes too onerous, or when it becomes too general. So I think it bears for industry discussion, and it bears that participation in the IG is very important in this case. Even if you just to provide inputs and try to develop outcomes rather than participate for it's very important in this case because data is the biggest problem that we have now with regards to quantification of climate risk that we have in Malaysia. And so what's happened now is different criteria, different banks, some more strict, some less strict. So we need some for standardization. Yeah, Ramsey?
Agree. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is talking about GP3 again. We've provided some example, and we've tried to provide example as well for GP4, and this is based on again with full transition already. So this is evaluation of an organization against for cogeneration of heat and power from biomass and bioenergy. I'm sure some of you will have clients that are basically saying as a power company, this is what I want to do, talking about solar panels, building solar panel plants and all of that, right? So the asset has to be aligned with climate mitigation principles. So there needs to be a plan, basically, let's say, for example, the company that's coming to you to say that I want to build solar panels and all of that. What is their own plan to become net zero? Are they talking about green energy development? And then when they produce their solar panels, how are they producing it? Number one, there's one question. The second question is how they're planning to transport it, because transportation in Malaysia contributes about 30% of CO2 for the overall country. So what sort of methodology do they plan to transport and how that's been accounted for? That is an important question. And it falls very much into scope 3. So like I said, and what we've discussed, Ramsey has discussed, is a lot of companies still haven't gone into scope 3. So how are we going to obtain that information for us in Malaysia to fulfill GP4, or for the company to demonstrate to you as a business operation that they are in GP4 if they can't get that data? Right. So when you got clients coming to you and say, oh, my company is doing this, I've got a full plan to transition and all of that, scope 3 then plays a very important part. We cannot ignore scope 3. You cannot do energy transition without scope 3. You need the scope 3 data. Basically, what is your impact of your biggest one is basically your supply chain and the logistics that you have on your carbon emission. So you cannot evaluate GP4 without scope 3 data. Now, whether they subscribe to science-based targets and all of that, that's another thing. But there must be at least a rational plan that includes the scope 3 in this case. And the evaluation of scope 3 then will drive how you view the company with regards to their carbon emission or their net zero plans in this case, right? So we will provide you this slide, and you will be able to look at it in further detail. And also with regards to GP3 and GP4, as Ramsey has said many times already, the ESG demonstration then becomes very important. You can refer to sustainability reporting, whether it's verified or non-verified, that's the next step. But you need to look at the rationality and the quality of the data that's provided in sustainability reporting. And you need to communicate this with your clients as well, because depending on which sector and the level of your client, whether it's a small cap or bigger cap company, the level of understanding on the value of sustainability report and the quality of data that's reported in sustainability report is also very variable in this case. So you've got companies that produce sustainability statements 4 pages. You've got companies that produce sustainability report 300, 400 pages. So that's the variability that I'm talking about. So it's important for you all to basically understand from a corporate evaluation basis, and GP3 and GP4 comes into this, where to get and how to look at the data. Anything to add, Ramsey?
Yeah. Interestingly, if we look at Malaysia, when you talk about energy, we can look at one big particular company under oil and gas, another big company in electricity, for example, or energy in totality. And interestingly enough, when you look at it, you have to ask yourself, and this is how you want to just give an illustration. How do you apply CCPT to these companies? For example, if you look at this energy company, You look at it, the portfolio within the balance sheet, still lots of it coming from coal industry. So you know that would definitely doesn't meet GP3 per se. But when you look at whether they have sufficient mitigation plan, whether they are moving towards renewable energy, they do have such plan and the commitment is there. And then that's where the question is, do you want to classify that as meeting GP4? Remember, CCPT provides a bit more flexibility because we look at the commitment as well. Um, and that would help to alleviate meeting the GP4 rather than EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy very prescriptive and you know the commitment may not be visible much in the EU taxonomy, but in CCPT the commitment has to be there. Now, notwithstanding that, when you look at the overall business activities, they probably don't meet GP1 or GP2 because their main activities are very much concentrated in coal industry. But the moment they issue bonds, like to have build more solar plants, for example, or have to have more renewable energy, that would really definitely meet the GP1 already, and therefore that can really have different classification for different transactions within one particular company. Not to mention the company. I think you all know the name of the company anyway.
Yes, thanks, Ramsey. Yeah, some companies in Malaysia, the big ones, have committed to net zero, but up to this point, we actually don't see anything down on paper. So it makes it hard to evaluate. Commitment does not mean demonstration of progress. So these ones you need to bear in mind, particularly when you're doing investment. And the alignment that you have with your fund managers also is very important in that sense. So if they come and the other thing is most of these companies like to ask for consortium, right, loans and all of that. So financial institutions in this case, when it comes to loan evaluation and when it comes to application of CCPT, definitely you all need to talk. You have to have a common platform and understand how you want to classify this organizations, particularly when they are that big. And has that much impact in Malaysia. I'm very cognizant of time, and I'm also very cognizant of the fact that we have a lot of questions. So I will just quickly run through how companies have been reporting in EU. And just bear in mind, this is just to give you an illustration. It's not necessary, and Bank Negara does not require you to report to this level. Just bear in mind that eventually we will get there. We will get here as we show here. But these are the considerations and the thought process that needs to be at the back of your mind as you develop the program, especially as you move towards a reporting requirement. So in this case, it's Acciona, the company, and the finance and sustainability work together with regards to the the EU taxonomy reporting requirement. And the sectors that they work in is quite big. And if you think about it, it applies very much to Malaysian companies because we have multi-sectoral conglomerates that are not just local but also international as well. So how do you evaluate and how do you monitor and how do you assess these companies and the quality of the reporting that they provide from you as a financial institution? I'm not talking about the reporting required. From your evaluation of this one company who is involved in 5-6 sectors. So GP3, GP4, you evaluate. How do you evaluate? Right? So that question arises again. And then if you do it on a transactional basis, GP1, GP2, bearing in mind that the sub-criteria that are in there as well. How do you evaluate as well? So common understanding from industry and with the regulator is also important in this case. And that's where BERSA and Bank Negara actually plays a role in helping with the common understanding, because we have got so many conglomerates in Malaysia. Right? So when you report as a financial institution and all of that, how do you report this and how do you treat with regards to conglomerates? And that's very important in that sense. So in this case, where we talk about Acciona, they also divided the taxonomy alignment with regards to EBITDA, global revenue, EBITDA, and annual capex based on the data that they have, which has been verified by independent auditors. And they break it down with regards to the various sector that they finance in and how they have treated it with regards to taxonomy alignment. So you can actually report it based on that. And bears in mind that whatever that you're doing from here onwards cannot be separated from your financial reporting. That's number one. Basically, if Bank Negara and they have stated is already driving towards TCFD reporting, financial information cannot be separated as one standalone basis. It has to be reported in your financial statements. That's number one. Number two, we have got the International Sustainability Standards Board, which has been put forward by the IFRS. They have issued 3 set of financial sustainability, one of them on ESG, one of them on finance, 3 set of guidelines with how they would like to see financial information being reported. So our expectation as meaning KPMG's expectation is that this is going to be released and probably adopted sometime end of this year or maybe next year. So if that's already released, adopted, of course, we have to go through the whole debate session first. And that's been adopted and released, then IFRS will probably give you 1 year, 2 years, probably 2 years before it becomes mandatory. So financial reporting of ESG, whether we're talking about taxonomy, no taxonomy, and all of that, cannot separate from financial reporting anymore. So increasingly now, as you go through this process, it gives you good discipline for you to identify where your ESG factors are and how it impacts with regards to your EBITDA, your revenue, your capex, and all, and also your exposures to climate change in that sense, because it's already aligned to TCFD requirement and ISSSD requirement, right? Then the next one, if you look at the data that they report, it is quite granular. And I know for Malaysian companies, a lot of them will be going, oh, I don't want to disclose this granular data. It's telling my competitors what they do. So in terms of board acceptance and even senior management acceptance, there has to be some paradigm change, number one. Number two, we are not asking for for the financial institutions to start reporting to such granularity. But if you start reporting in terms of GP1, GP2, GP3 in terms of revenues and percentage of revenue, percentage of EBITDA, and percentage of capex, and even if you don't want to report this, but you need to start tracking this, because this information will eventually be very important and required for reporting, right? Then in terms of disclosure of taxonomic, they give you a flowchart of how they consider what is important and how they consider with regards to taxonomic criteria. You can do this as well. It does not have to be as complicated. My philosophy has always been keep it as simple as possible so that you're able to show all the information at one go. You don't have to overcomplicated matters in terms of reporting when you evaluate your GP1 and GP2, especially on a transaction basis. That's one side, and GP3, GP4 on a corporate basis on the other side, on how you evaluate them on your taxonomic basis. Because if you're able to demonstrate that you have a process flow, that's still one step better than having no data at all, right? At least it shows that you have thought about how you want to do this, and you have started the application of the CCPT text or CCPT onto your customers and onto your portfolios that you have. As Ramzi has said earlier, you can still put this as EC, right? Exceptions until you get the data when you're ready, right, Ramzi?
Yeah. Again, if you can qualify to hold until you have proper data, then you can always put there. I think the really intention is for us to start thinking on how do we want to capture all this into our process.
So a flow diagram will actually show the intent of where you want to go and what sort of information that you want, right? You can then lastly talk about assurance, like we talked about earlier. Assurance, this is not a must, right? It just gives added confidence with regards to how you can get your whole taxonomic process assured. This might not happen. I don't see this happening in Malaysia for the next 3 years because we're still going through the evolution phase. And as you implement new things, we generally advise companies not to be so ambitious and go straight for assurance. Give yourself some time to breathe, to work through the processes and make it work first for you. remembering that at the end of the day, this is all about risk management. And this is not about reporting requirement or whatever. It has to work for you to ensure that you manage your climate risk and you reduce your financial exposures as much as possible to organizations or to economic sectors or to transactions that present a ready climate risk, financial climate risk to your organization. So that is the more important thing to remember. So with that, we go into question and answer. Back to you, Ramsey.
All right, thank you so much, Oi. I do hope the experience from KPMG and OI specifically with regards to EU taxonomy will give us some idea on how do we want to do that for CCPT taxonomy, especially the dashboard. I would think that there's one way of how we want to utilize the data coming from CCPT once we have properly classified the portfolios. So let's look at the Q&A. I'm looking at from backwards because I'm trying to filter the first session question as well. But last one, we go straight. The quick clarification. Is this correct that outstanding loans are expected to be reviewed and categorized? Yes, it is true that all outstanding loans and financing are expected to be reviewed by June 2023. I would think within a year because CCPT comes into effect January 2022. You may take some 1 year to review your clients, especially after first half. So you may still have some gap there that need to be addressed. But by next year, I think everyone should be classified according to CCPT. So second question coming from Sarata. Must documents refers to environment risk, whereas Bank Negara is the climate risk. Whether it's done ready to lower the scope of assessment as climate risk is a subset of environmental risk. Well, I think that is very true in a way, but that in terms of definition, you look at, because a lot of people use interchangeably the words sustainability risk, environmental risk, climate risk. You need to be mindful of the hierarchy of those risks. But in a nutshell, even CCPT does address environmental risk. When you look at GP3, it looks at the other parts of climate risk, environmental risk, which is not part of GP3. So it's covered in GP3. There's a social also elements also inside GP5, especially human rights and labor law. But JC3 still refers to as a climate change committee. So that's why it's very much climate change perspective, but it still includes environmental portion of it. I think this coming from Anna. Oi, you wanted to take up?
Yeah, but then the question is, any learnings from other countries which have successfully, well, I think what we have tried to do in our case studies is to provide you the EU approach and how it's been applied and the difficulties that are actually faced by financial institutions. Have a look at it when you get the slides. And in Malaysia, yes, the challenges are with regards to data and consistency of evaluation of information from client. You asked whether we should have a standardized industry questionnaire to ensure fair and consistent assessment. That never actually happened in the EU. Different companies, basically, just like investors, the investors that come out to Malaysia, they have their own set of questionnaire. And if you've got 10 foreign investors for your organization, you just have to deal with 10 of them. So similarly, for the financial institutions, it never actually happened. So it could be something that you could discuss with regards to common questions to lessen the burden, given the fact that Malaysia is a much smaller space, and we do have something like nearly 1 million SMEs that will at some point in time be part of your clientele. So I think it's worthwhile exploring, but I think it should be done under the auspices of the JC3 and the IG in this case, because standardization and agreement, I can see a lot of arguments there, Ramsey. Discussion, rather, I would say robust discussions occurring among the FIs as to what are the key questions that should be included.
That's true. There's questions on mortgage financing. I think it's about whether it's green, if it's double counting or not. I think what he meant is when we give out loans to green building, certified building, it's already classified as either transitioning, for example, meeting GP1 and GP2. And then when the retail consumer purchase this particular green building, then it be classified as a green under retail. It is as it is in terms of definition. I think I'm more cautious with the word usage of green because that for me it is really subject to interpretation within each bank lah, and FI. Where possible, I try to avoid using colors to put green, black, brown because that sometimes can be generalized and the definition itself can be different from one FI to another. I would rather go with them straight away, specifically meetings GP1, GP2 style rather than putting say as a green. But into just to answer directly, yes, it will be included because there are two different loans given. One is on the building itself, and one is on purchasing of the buildings, and therefore it be reported, but in different two business segments. Okay. Second, the next one in terms of Roberts, how should we classify financing to other FI? Should it be GP3 since FI business generally does not direct significant harm to the environment? A lot of time people look at GP3 and GP4 straight away. Or should it be GP4 since FIs may indirectly finance business clients which are still transitioning? Alternatively, is there a list by CCPT IG to identify GP3 or GPFIs for standard? To be honest, when we look at FIs, again, the business activities, unless you have like more than 50% very much in C1 or C2 or even looking at a zero carbon perspective, it's very, very difficult to say that the main business activities of a bank can be considered as meeting GP1 or GP2 because we do support all kind of things. And of course, ideally, we really need to look at the scope 3 itself. Then you see where we are financing towards to. Therefore, I'm more inclined to classify banks or FIs for that matter, unless that bank's really meant for sustainability purpose lah. But other than that, it will not meet GP1, GP2 from business activity point of view. But the transition plans that takes place can really you can assess it in meeting GP4, and for a lot of time it be classified as C3. So that's my point of view. You may have different views, and we can discuss back in the CCPTIG should you have a different way of interpreting it.
I think to add on, in Malaysia we do consortiums, a lot of consortiums, as I said earlier. So that discussion does need to happen because you need to define it for yourselves and how you want to move forward with regards to consortium reporting and consortium of loan. I don't see that aspect of it going away. I think is that still going to happen? So how are you going to deal with it? So that discussion is actually very important.
That's a good point. Yes. Yeah. We bring that up to the CCPIG then, consortium of banks. Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you're going to do cross-jurisdictional consortium loans, that also happens, right? So how are you going to define that as well?
True. All right. Let me see. Other than the practical, I'm looking at for to answer. Meeting.
I think if we talk about Sanitan's Muhammad Sanitan question, based on classification of logic flow, do you agree that embedding GP3 assessment is only applied to GP3 applies to business? Agree with me, Ramsey?
Yeah, definitely.
Right? It's not about transaction evaluation.
Yeah. So again, a lot. I agree because when we look at the C1 to C5, the classification of CCPT, and people start asking, hey, where is GP3 made and GP1, GP2 not being met, for example? And this is where it creates confusion. The way I see it, and it goes by the flow, like I said, I look at transaction, whether it meets GP1 and GP2. If it does not, then the next question is whether it meets GP4 or not. GP3 is out of my somewhat. But GP, the way I say, if you meet GP3, most of the time you should meet GP4 as well. It does not make sense if you doesn't make any harm to environment, but at the same time you still doesn't have transition plan. Most of the time, because you have proper transition plan, that you don't do any harm to environment lah. So that's how I see things. But I will look at the flow of that.
Yeah, there's a
Right.
last question by Mohammed Tan. They said, is there a need to assess GP3 even if it's not applicable to the transaction to GP1, GP2?
Well, yes, actually. If you, sorry, if do you need to assess GP3 if you don't meet GP1, GP2? Well, in that classification, you don't have to, because I do see some banks within our purview of CCPT-IG, they skip that process. So they have flow. That means, okay, first thing what we should do, we should meet GP1 or not, then move to GP2. Some of them even skip GP2 when they meet GP1. So if I meet GP1, I skip GP2 because I already meet all. So I meet GP1. I skip straight to GP3 if GP1 is being met.
I think Ramzi, sorry to interrupt. I think the question is, if they meet GP1 or GP2, do they still need to do GP3?
If they meet GP1 or GP2, they still need GP3.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it relates to whether it's C1 or C2. So if you look at the tick box there earlier, if you meet GP1, then or GP2, you already coming to the C1, C2, and C4 category. Then you have to assess whether you meet GP3 or not. If yes, okay, that's good. Then you probably can classify as C1. But as I said, then you have to look at, if you think that GP3 is met, then you can put as C1. But if not, then you have to move to GP4, which also provides the classification in C2 and C4. So I'm trying to also remember all the classifications. But at least for Maybank, we do combine these two and assess where we are from a checklist criteria and the scorecards level. So we do that and see whether company from business point of view meeting GP3 and GP4. And then after that, all transactions that coming in, we only look at transactions and start putting in and ask ourselves whether it meets GP1 and GP2 and map that accordingly to the CCPT. So it's easier that way to assess at business level first, and then whatever transactions coming after that, we just classify accordingly to the CCPT classification.
Thanks, Ramzi. There's one more question that says, if a client is a subsidiary in Malaysia, if client is subsidiary in Malaysia and relying on private initiatives, can we treat the client as initiatives? No, because whatever that you do in Malaysia as a company still applies to Malaysia, kan? So if they have, let's say, for example, green hydrogen plant in Hong Kong, for example, cannot be translated to Malaysia because it's not happening to Malaysia, right?
Well, okay. So we had a lot also debate on this under CCPT-IG. The assessment is really depends on how much influence does the parents have on the subsidiary here. If it's like what you just said, the illustration that you gave shows that there's not much flow of mitigation coming from parents to subsidiary, then yes, you may not say it meets GP1 or GP1 for that matter. But if the group itself has a proper framework, policies, transition plan that need to be rolled out in all subsidiaries, and the subsidiaries can show that, okay, we are also following the group's transition plan, and this is how we want to move, and you can demonstrate that, then GP4 can be, you can use it as to meet GP4. It's just about evidently to show how much you are following the group lah. But if you are independent totally from the group and say a group has, but you yourself never have that proper transition plan, or doesn't show that commitment or evidence of commitment, then I would think you don't meet GP4 for that matter. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for 2 questions. We've got 3 more minutes. The question for one from Hugh Teck Long is, for GP3, if the project is has got planning approval, which is KM from local authority, and of which the processing of KM provides approval for DOE, Jabatan Alam Sekitar, does it mean GP3? Okay, remember, Hugh Teck, that the GP3 applies to the company. So and if you talk about planning approval and the EIA approval and all of that, that applies to the project. So you need to evaluate both separately, right? So if let's say, for example, you have company ABC has got a process to apply for all of this all the time, then you need to evaluate for GP3 whether the company is actually doing no harm or not. Because you can do EIAs and still harm the environment. So all of that needs to be considered as a company for GP3. Ramsey, any more?
Yeah,
like
I also have to link it to also your own risk appetite statements as well as your REC. Say, for example, the DOE may approve certain deforestation in certain land, for example. But at least for Maybank, for just to give illustration, that we adopt no deforestation, right? So this probably not aligned to our strategies and our values, and perhaps just because the DOE approve it, it could be not aligned to the approach that we want to adopt lah. So really, these two has to be come together. Yeah.
Okay, the next question and the last question is back to you. We've got 1 minute for this. Ramsey, understood that GP1, GP2 classification at the transaction level. So if our bank is merely financing the general working capital for customers, and we are not the financier for green loans that is supposedly qualified for green GP1, GP2, do we classify our loan as GP3, assuming that the customer has been assessed as does no harm to the environment?
Well, okay. Now, again, transaction-wise, here it doesn't meet GP1. Sorry, I'm trying to locate where you find that question. But okay, if it doesn't meet GP1, GP2, you don't go through. So you only have C3 and C5. Again, you ask yourself whether GP4 is being met or not. Financing to a green building does not mean also that the company itself is having a proper transition plan. You need to really understand the business assessment as well. And you cannot assume that everything that particular developer, for example, have all the green buildings in there. So you need to really understand what will be the main activities in there. Perhaps this is the only one that has green building attached to it. So you need to see whether it meets GP4 and issue separately. So if they do finance green building, so it meets GP1 or GP1, GP2 as well, GP1, but then the GP4 may not be met, so it can be classified as C4.
Okay, I think that's it. That's all we've got. Time is already 12 p.m. and I'm sure everybody is hungry if they've stayed on from the morning. And I'm sure some of us are already crying out for a comfort break. So back to you, Shirley. Yeah, Ramsey, I'll pass back to Shirley.
Yeah. So thank you so much for all who have stayed on for 1.5 hours, and those who have stayed on since session 1 for 3 hours. I totally appreciate your time, and please feel free to join us again. Copy that email inside the slide, ccptig@bnm.gov.my. Please join us and have more deliberation on all these issues. Happy to help out each other. And thank you so much again. And pass back to Shirley. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Encik Ramsey and Oi Ching, for the insightful session. With that, we have come to an end of this training session. For those who will be joining us at the 2 p.m. session, specifically for ITOs, see you soon. And for the rest, please do take the time to answer the survey questions. Thank you and have a good day.